It's Friday. Welcome to the Stories and Sips Irish Whiskey Lock-in Livestream. Thanks everybody for tuning in this evening. It's Friday, which means that I have dusted down the turtleneck, taken it down for its weekly tour, and we are coming to you live at 7 o'clock Eastern on the East Coast, and it is 4 p.m. Pacific where I am. We've got a great live stream tonight. Thanks to everybody for showing up. We've got so many on the line already, 40 plus people tuned in already, which is fantastic. We're going to have a really fun time tonight. It is week number 800 of our quarantine, of our lock-in. We're locked in at home. We'd prefer to be with our friends and with our family, but we find ourselves here instead, virtually meeting up and hanging out with the people that we love and know and have gotten to know over the last few weeks. And we're doing all of that through Irish whiskey. So it's a pleasure, as always, to have you here. Let me know what's in your glass. What are you drinking? And tell me, where are you in the world? We've got people I know joining us from all across the United States, all the way across Europe. Many Irish and those in Germany and France are telling me that it is way past their bedtime, and I couldn't agree with you more. It is. You shouldn't be here at all. You should be asleep. In Ireland, you're hiding from hurricanes and storms and rain and gale force winds across the country, and you're hunkering down as if we didn't have enough to deal with in the world at the moment. I know that's what's battering Ireland at the moment, but at least we are here tonight and we're able to have a drink together. We're able to have a bit of crack. And a bit of crack we're going to have indeed. So for those of you who have just joined and for whom it is their first time on the Lock-in live stream, my name is Barry Chandler and I host a podcast called Stories and Sips, and I host this Lock-in live stream every Friday. And if you would like your friends to join, if you'd like your family to join, there's a share button, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or on Twitter. Feel free to share this stream. Feel free to let more people know that this thing is kicking off and that we're going to have a few whiskeys tonight. We're going to have a bit of crack. We're going to have a bit of chat. So feel free to share it with your friends and with your family. So Johnny is in Long Beach and he is drinking Black Barrel. Fantastic. JJ up there in Canada is drinking his Method and Madness Wild Cherry Wood in an espresso glass. Well, whatever you can do to get it into you, JJ, whether you drink it out of a shoe or a boot, it doesn't matter. Fair play to you. Middleton 1985, Peter with the big guns tonight. Fair play to you, Peter. Whiskey's for drinking. It shouldn't be sitting on shelves. It should be inside your belly. Nick Valley, good to see you, Nick, with your Redbreast 12. Fantastic. Nick recently purchased his first Redbreast. I know he's a big fan, so great to see you here. Thanks for joining us. It's way past Mick's bedtime. It's way past many people's bedtime if you're joining us from across the pond there in Europe. Laurie, putting in a plug for a Whiskey Chats podcast, which everybody should check out as well, for Laurie's great chats with everybody in the Irish whiskey world. And we're joined by people who've been drinking all night on their Friday night dram. Omar Fitzel, good to see you, buddy. Thanks for joining. So many of you coming up here are joining in every week to support and hang out. I suppose you've nowhere else to be. I'm the destination of last resort, and that's fine too. I'll happily take I'll happily take that. Julie's in Denver, drinking a dram of Dunville's Three Crowns. Great to see Dunville's making an appearance. That's fantastic. And Derek Carr, evening from Ed. Good to see you, Ed. Derek Carr is drinking a glass of Killowen Tequila, which is fantastic because we're going to be drinking the same thing tonight. It's going to be the first whiskey we drink. Sheng, who is a big Irish whiskey fan up there in Wisconsin, is drinking Tyrconnell single malt, which is fantastic. What has Wayne got? Wayne Sloan is drinking Redbreast 12 cask strength, which is fantastic. And he's got his Killowen and his Bushmills ready. So yes, so we're drinking, we are going to have three different, very unique whiskeys, all of them with their own stories, all of them with their own particular nuance, flavors, backgrounds, and I'm excited to walk through them with you. I know many of you will have enjoyed these before. We will be bringing on very shortly Brendan Carty, entrepreneur and founder of the Killowen Distillery. First whiskey we'll taste tonight when Brendan comes on is the third release from Brendan's Bonded Experimental Series, a 10-year-old whiskey which is finished in tequila barrels. Brendan's going to walk us through the Killowen 10-year-old whiskey with the tequila finish. Then we will move not very far away from Killowen, a little bit further north, up to the Northern Irish coast, to the village of Bushmills, where we'll be popping open a drop of Bushmills Original which is a lovely, light, easy drinker. And then we're going down the other side of the country altogether, down to the southwest tip of Ireland, down to Dingle. We're going to do a virtual tour of Ireland tonight, drinking our way from the north to the south and not stopping in between. So thanks again for, now we're up to 85, 90 people joining across our channel. So we're streaming across Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitter. And this is replayed for those of you catching the replay. This is our Irish Whiskey Lock-in live stream, where we bring on the people behind Irish Whiskey. We get together, we remove isolation, we build a bit of community, and we have a bit of crack, and we drink a little bit of whiskey when we're doing it. So I have a few things to share with you before I bring Brendan on to talk to us. So I've shared the 3 whiskeys that we're drinking. So a little bit of whiskey news to catch you up on what's happening in the world of Irish whiskey. And as you'd imagine, it's a bit of a quiet world at the moment, with this pandemic hitting many distilleries hard, and many are not releasing anything at the moment. But there are some bright lights on the horizon, and there's good news to share. So, for example, last week we talked about the announcement of the Redbreast Dream Cask, and we had that announcement last week since we've last spoken to you. And that announcement was that the 3rd Dream Cask from Redbreast is a 28-year-old Redbreast port, and that is not going to be on sale to the general public. It's going to be instead be offered up for sale and for purchase through a ballot system, and that ballot starts, basically you can log in and express your interest in participating in the ballot starting from Monday, and that takes place on Redbreast's website called the Birdhouse. So if you would like to get access to your chance to win the chance to buy a bottle, then go to Redbreast's The Birdhouse website and register your interest starting on Monday, and that'll be open for a week. And during that week, anybody can register their interest, and then on June 2nd, they will announce who has been fortunate enough to win the chance to purchase a bottle of their very own Dream Cask 3rd edition. So that is exciting. I'm looking forward to that. What else is happening in the world of whiskey news? Nothing at all. Many distilleries have retooled and are doing tremendous work helping frontline workers by producing hand sanitizer, and they're doing great things delivering that around the country, and we will showcase more of their work as we go over the coming weeks. For those of you who follow along with my podcast and who are fans of Irish whiskey, we had a great chat this week with Mary Ferreter. Mary Ferreter is the global ambassador for Dingle, for the Dingle Distillery, a woman who has been there since the very beginning. And we had a fantastic chat this week. And during our chat, and Mary's been part of the distillery since before it was a distillery, since before it was even an idea. Mary was kind enough to bring on a couple of extra special guests as well to talk with us. And so we ended up having a chat with Mary and with new master distiller Graham Cool and his wife Faye Cool. So it was the first episode where 4 of us we're 4 people were having a chat together. So you get 4 people for the price of 1 if you'd like to check out that episode of Stories and Sips. And it's Dingle Distillery's founding mother, because that's really what Mary is. She's an absolute lady, a kind soul who has always been very generous with her time and her insight, and has always been very kind to me when I've come to Dingle, and I'm very fond of Mary. And it's one of the most listened to episodes that we've ever released, and it's only been out there for the last 3 or 4 days. So I really encourage you to go check that out. If you're a fan of podcasts at all, or a fan of Irish whiskey, you can find that. It's available on your favorite podcast player. A lot of people listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, but you can also listen to it on storiesandsips.com. So that was a great chat. We have another great chat coming up on our podcast next week. Stay tuned for a very special guest. He doesn't normally do interviews and hasn't done for quite a while, but we're bringing somebody out who's got a very unique perspective on the Irish whiskey world, and I'm not going to share who that is. It's going to be a surprise. All I can say is to stay tuned to Stories and Sips on Facebook and YouTube, or Facebook and Twitter, and Barry Chandler, Irish Whiskey Barry on Instagram, and Irish Whiskey BC on Twitter, and I'll share more details of that. Casey says the whiskey cabinet is on point. Yeah, the whiskey cabinet is growing as more and more whiskies get featured or need to be featured on the live stream. The cabinet is filling up pretty quickly. So I'm going to have to do a rotation and working my way through these whiskies again and again and again as we bring out 3 different whiskies every week. So in order to make sure I have enough, I have to keep the cabinet full to make sure it's stocked up. So I will check these comments and check the questions that you have over the course of the evening. We're going to bring on Brendan Carty in a second from Killowen Distillery. If you've got questions for Brendan, please put them in the comments, whether you're watching on Facebook or on Twitter or on YouTube. Add your questions into the comments, and I'll pose them to Brendan. It's very late at night in Ireland. I'm going to be very conscious of his time, but he's been very generous in allowing us to interview him and to bring him on tonight. So please let us know what questions you do have for Brendan, and we are going to bring him on now in a minute. But before I do, I want to introduce you to Killowen Distillery. So Killowen Distillery, which Brendan is going to share more about with us, is in fact Ireland's smallest distillery. It was the 24th operational distillery in Ireland when it opened not so long ago. Brendan's going to go into detail on it. And before he does, I want to share with you a little video to give you an overview of what exactly is happening up there in Killowen. Brendan Carty, entrepreneur and founder of Killowen Distillery. Welcome to the Stories and Sips Lock-in Livestream.
Well, how you doing? Thanks very much for having me, Barry.
Thanks for joining us. It looks like from that video that you are the man that does everything in the distillery, from rolling the barrels to stirring the fermenters. Is there anything that you're not doing there?
Yeah, no, we just had a decent cameraman that day. We've got a good distiller up there as well. It gives us a good bit of help. And, there's Pierce and Hugh. And there's also Liam and Shane, the other co-founders as well, who do a lot of work in the background. Liam Brogan and Shane McCarthy and myself were the three founders of the distillery, so they need to be recognised there as well.
And so there's only a few of you there working in the distillery, and we'll go into detail and talk a little bit about that. But I'm very curious about this whiskey, which I had a little sneaky neep of earlier, just to try it and be ready for it. You are a man that founded this distillery, and you didn't come from a whiskey background. You had a very different line of work before starting this, right?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I'm actually trained as an architect in the first place. And during the recession, I went out to Australia. There was no work here, and it just become chartered at the time. And I was working as an architect out there, some really good work. But at the same time, there was a nice whiskey club in the Oak Barrel in the middle of Sydney. And I tasted a Belgrove whiskey in there, and I thought it was fantastic. And I went down to Belgrove in Tasmania, and I just wanted to see how this man was making whiskey. And he was making it on a small scale with flame-fed stills and locally grown ingredients. And he was basically making a mixed mash bill as well. And more importantly, he was focusing though on a rye whiskey. Predominantly, a single malt was a rye, and I tasted it, and it was fantastic. And it tasted just as good as the best of an Irish whiskey. And this thing was only 3 years old, and I couldn't believe it. And it's just because of the techniques that he was using. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do the same thing. And yeah, that's how it happened.
When was that? When did you get that idea to get into the whiskey side of things?
I suppose now it's probably about 6 or 7 years ago now. It just took a wee while to filter in, and yeah, it ended up just becoming a reality, and it was going to happen. Before I knew it, I was chatting with Liam and Shane, who had already set up Ireland Craft Beverages, and they had a good business mentality, and started putting a business plan together. And we found the place, we started building it before we had any money together. And then we were building it before we had planning permission, before we had building control approval. And yeah, we just worked at risk, and then it all just started coming to place. As you can see there, that building, everything's made from upcycled materials. Upcycled shed, there was no roof, there was trees growing out of it. The window security is cut up gates, the old shipping container. The doors are old doors welded together to create a bigger door. Reuse the existing doors where possible, but the thing was a wreck before we got there. And a nice little paint job and a new roof. Got rid of the oldest bed.
It's in a remarkably beautiful part of the country. Tell us, I've got a little map here to show where it is in the world. It's not in Cork. It's in not Cork, in Northern Ireland. Tell us where exactly Killowen is for those who are not familiar.
So Killowen's in the north. It's situated in the Mourne Mountains. So the Kingdom of Mourne is a beautiful part of the country, and I suppose it's one of Ireland's best kept secrets. When people drive into the north, they just bypass us to go through Newry, and they keep going on to Belfast or beyond. And everybody overlooks the Mourne Mountains, and the people from the area really treasure the Mournes. They're beautiful, it's a large wilderness. It's an area of outstanding natural beauty, so it's got that recognition, and it's right on our doorstep. And there's huge amounts of history there. There's difference in dialects of the English language, as you go from one side to the other. And it's beautiful. There's also a wall that goes around the whole of the Mournes as well, the Mourne Wall, it's a fascinating piece of infrastructure, But yeah, it's well worth a visit.
What was this building? So you rehabbed this building. What was it before it has now become a distillery?
It was an old stables. Part of it was used for a workshop back in time. Guys used to make concrete posts in it, and predominantly it was a stable. You can see where there was part where the cows lived in and a part where a horse lived. And but over the last 20 years, it was just basically, it was ripe with, brambles, briars and trees. So we stripped all that out and got it turned around.
So this is what it looks like today inside. This is, I believe, Ireland's smallest distillery, which I think is a badge you wear with honor. Is there a smaller distillery than Killowen? And I mean that in the best terms. It is a micro distillery in every sense of the word, isn't it?
It is indeed. Every single square centimetre is a prisoner, or square inch for our American friends is a prisoner. So if you, there's just no space at all. In the barrel room, there's a barrels 4 high, and we're running out of space. So yeah, it's great, I suppose every day is a challenge. Yeah. And
space for
it is, we need a pest control officer, and he doesn't charge big wages, so yeah.
So tell me about this room here. So this is the distillery. This room here is everything that happens in the distillery, is it?
No, that's 50% of the floor area, and then on the other side we've got a bar tasting area, and in there it's a bar tasting area office. So there's a lot of musicians in the local area as well, and they would come here playing music. We have nice ceilings in there. We session kills in the evenings in the summers, and it's great sometimes when we have large tours to come up and play music as well. We had there's some renowned musicians from the Mournes as well, and they all come up and played music there at the end of last summer, and everybody was squeezed into that wee room. There must have been about, I don't know, there's probably about 40 of us in there.
Is that right?
You couldn't swing, you couldn't move. And then the other room is just where all the barrels are stored, one on top of the other. And it's a beautiful smell in there.
So I want to dive into some of your philosophies, because you've got a unique perspective, I think, on Irish whiskey. You've got some beliefs that are fairly strongly held, and you're applying those beliefs to your whiskey production. But this won't drink itself. And so I have to open this and I have to sip on this, and I'd love you to tell me more about this. So this is the recent release. It is a 10-year-old whiskey, tequila finish, from the third in the Bonded Experimental series. What should we know about this, Brendan?
Right, this one, the third one. The first one was a dark rum cask. The second one was a Chocolina cask from the Basque country. And this one is tequila. So what we do here is we basically, there's a bit of people are quite dismissive of blends, and we like to set ourselves challenges. And we got some really nice whiskey, and the back of the bottle lets you know exactly where the whiskey comes from. It actually states, what counties it comes from as well. So, really pushing the boundaries. From the outset, there's a big issue in Irish whiskey, and there's a lack of transparency. There's a serious lack of integrity bottlings, and the Irish whiskey industry is falling behind for this reason. The consumer deserves to know and wants to know what they're drinking, and there's a bit of an obnoxious law in place in the country that doesn't allow you to give full transparency. But we've given as much as we possibly can without crossing the line, and it tells the consumer that there's cask strength, there's no filtration, there's no added colour, there's no added water, and not let alone no chill filtration. There's no filtration whatsoever. So you've got bits of char in there. But it also gives you the blend breakdown. It lets the consumer know that they've got malt in there and they've got grain in there and where it comes from. And it lets people know the grain, the blended blends aren't something to be snubbed at. When they're done right, they're done really well. And this blend competes with a lot of single malts out there, really good ones. And that was the challenge, and we were glad that it was so successful.
So you've been sourcing these whiskies from distilleries where you feel they have stock that will contribute to a blend that you'd like, the style, the blend that will meet your own kind of taste and profile preferences, and then you've been finishing them in barrels that you've been sourcing yourself, or have you been working with distilleries to source these barrels, like in this case the tequila barrel?
Yeah. So we sourced that. All of our casks are sourced through different barrel people who work with barrels. So we torture a lot of people who work with barrels, and so they're bought from different groups all over the place. This one was actually bought through a French broker, and so it worked very well, as was the last. The last we sourced, we went to the Basque Country ourselves and looked at wines and that. But an important part of this blend ratio was a single malt from a larger distillery in Ireland. And we are small fry. Big distilleries do not look at us. We approach them time and time again, and they do not look at us. Luckily enough, County Down is now the new hub of distilling in Ireland, of independent distillers, completely independent, and there's a good solidarity among them. They work together, and you'll notice that one of them actually helped us out, and they had some old stock from an older distillery, and they sold this to us, which we were very grateful. I don't know if we can mention them. It's Acklandville Distillery. Sorry about that.
Great. I like the fact that transparency is front and center. I know that some of the Irish laws regarding transparency may be for a industry that is no longer with us, an older industry that perhaps has not yet in all areas caught up. I mean, the legislation and the requirements, let's say health and safety, the HSE requirements for labeling have perhaps not caught up. And I know that you're a strong proponent of transparency and what should be on a bottle. And would it be fair to say that not all your bottles would meet the expected labeling? You'd go beyond that for the consumer to share more information.
Yeah, we go beyond that for the consumer. But yeah, it's certainly legal. I know we're being investigated at the minute by certain lobby groups that tend to have a lot of control in the Irish whiskey industry, and they're only serving to create more detriment to the industry, in my opinion.
So talk to me about, why did you decide to release an experimental bonded series while you're making your own whiskey? What was the need to get a whiskey into the market?
We absolutely love whiskey, and we thought there was a market gap out there, and it's all about making the whiskey that you want to drink, and the way we distill our whiskey, I suppose we'll talk about that shortly, is because we want to make the whiskey that we want to drink. It's not out there, and I think there's a lot more people like me, but a lot of people want to drink this sort of stuff. A lot of people want to take a drink and know what they're drinking, and therefore it educates your palate. If you're tasting a particular flavour, you want to know why you're tasting it. But as well as that, there's not enough cask strength whiskies out there. There just isn't. There's not enough non-chill filtered whiskies out there. There's actually none. There's actually no Irish whiskies out there that haven't been filtered at all. So we wanted to do that, and there's so much more flavour in this because of the lack of the no filtration. And there's actually bits of char floating around the bottle, which is evident that there's no filtration. So that might be a bit of a Marmite point for some people, but I think it's great. It's just about giving people what they want, And
So don't
that's what
pour this through a cloth. Don't pour the bottle through a cloth to get rid of that char. It's there for a reason.
No, you definitely not. Maybe buy another whiskey if you're going to do that.
On the palate, Brendan, there's like white pepper notes that are incredible on the palate, and a hint almost of just, there's a spice beyond the pepper that I'm struggling to put my finger on. What do you get in the palate when you taste this?
I was whenever we done this tasting with Whiskey Club Belfast, Paul came laugh because he said I must have been on drugs when I wrote the tasting notes. But everybody's tasting notes can be quite different. But for me, maybe I was a wee bit biased because I actually thought that we were going to get a lot more savoury notes in here. Things that that I thought were coming through from the tequila cask in comparison with the previous release we had, which was much more orchard fruits and fruit and light. This one tends to be, I thought there's a little bit more vegetal notes and herbal notes in there, a little bit of nuttiness on mushroom. And there is that in there. It's coming straight from the cask. But at the same time, you get a lovely sherry note in there as well, because one of our components of this was actually finished in a sherry cask. One of the, it might say 10-year-old on the bottle, by the way, but it's actually 12-year-old and 11-year-old. It's just took us that bloody long to get the series up and running. We had the label printed as well, and we thought, you know what, 10-year-old works, and we'll keep the whole series the same.
You talk about these earthy herbal notes. I get the sense that is something that you're going for with the whiskies that you're making. So I've heard you talk about how your whiskey is not like other whiskies, and it's not going for that smooth silkiness that we might be used to with blended Irish whiskies. You've got a very different approach, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. Those earthy notes, I think, are brilliant. They add a whole other layer of complexity, and we certainly get that, and it's because of the way we do it. And there's those three myths of Irish whiskey. That Irish whiskey's triple distilled for extra smoothness. It certainly wasn't. Historically, it was double distilled, and it wasn't never smooth. It was, to call whiskey smooth is a bit of an insult. Whiskey's well balanced. It's bold. It's complex. And that's what we're going for, and we're trying to do that now and carry it on through. And it would be my intention never to water down a whiskey. I would hope to be constantly releasing cask strength whiskies. But yeah, just having those earthy notes, for example, that whenever I don't know if we're going to start chatting about the process of how we make whiskey.
Let's talk about that.
Look, we use flame-fed stills, so I think we're the only flame-fed stills in the country, and it adds a layer and a dimension of complexity there as well, known as the Maillard reaction. It's constantly burning and creating these hot spots at the base of the still. And people who say it doesn't have an influence are absolutely mad, because I know it has an influence when I'm in there with a power hose, spraying the base of the still and getting a bit of timber in there and scraping the char off the base of the still. So it burns up at the base, and those flavours transfer through the whiskey. We also use our stills are highly inefficient. So when I worked in a similar size distillery in Scotland for a while, they were getting the shift done within 6 hours. For us, it takes 12 hours. So that's twice the length of time in these stills of the same size. And it's just probably because of the shape of them, but also because we use these big, chunky worm tub condensers at the front. These worm tub condensers, they create less of a draw on the still. I think that's the science behind it. Whereas if you've got a shell and tube condenser, you're creating a draw on that steam. These are very inefficient. They whenever they condense as well, they get very dirty inside, and it takes a lot of cleaning, But you can't help it. There's a lot of build-up of almost like a black soot, which needs cleaned out every day on the inside of them. And but creates, whenever they condense, it condenses slower, and it brings with it a huge amount of oils and a huge amount of flavour in there as well. And that carries through. We actually sometimes use a little bit of muslin at the end to capture some of those oils that are coming through. So it's really pot still heavy stuff that we're trying to make, and that was the aim from the outset. Enough of this triple distilled for extra smoothness Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey shouldn't be apologising for being whiskey.
So big bold statement. You're double distilling, you worm tub condensing, and your direct flame heating. So obviously you're getting a very different product out the other end than others are getting, because your process is so different, from the size of the stills to the types of stills to the way you condense. what styles of Irish whiskey are you setting out to make? And then how will those styles then, do you think, differ at the end once they're ready to bottle from similar styles that are produced on the island of Ireland?
I think we're looking more towards the real history of pot still whiskey. My favourite whiskies today are definitely pot still whiskies that are distilled in Cork. They're fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But if you were ever lucky enough to taste like an old cumber, and I don't mean old cumber, I mean old cumber, it's amazing stuff. And if you look at all those mash bills that the likes of, you know, Charlie Roach, McGuffin, or the guys like Finan O'Connor have discovered, and Brian Green have discovered down through the years, things like from Bandon Distillery, for example. Those old mash bills show that Irish whiskey was made with 30% oats, rye and wheat. But the current legislation only allows us to use 5% oats, rye and wheat. Why would you be writing yourself off so much flavour? You know, we need to be genuine about what Irish whiskey was. And you know, Irish whiskey was the aristocratic drink of choice throughout the whole of the British Empire, which was 2/3 of the bloody world at one stage. And now it fell to the wayside. And we need to know why people loved it. And they loved it because it had so much more potential when it was made slightly differently. And all we need to do is broaden that mash bill for what pot still is. And I think we're going to prove it by making it. And everybody could be doing it. And it's definitely pot still. It might not be allowed to be. We might not be allowed to call it pot still, but do you know? A quick way of saying it is that we've been making it for longer this way than we haven't. You know, so we need to
ask you about that. I'm curious about. There's quite a growing groundswell of support for changes to the legal definitions of what certain styles of whiskey are in Ireland, and I'm always very curious. And you know, I haven't asked this enough people, and I'll start it with you. Isn't it still pots? Isn't the flavour still pot still that you're trying to get to, whether you call it pot still or not? So the flavour is not going to change no matter what you call it in the bottle. And were people buying Irish whiskey in the 1800s because it said pot still or pure pot still or whatever it said at the time, or were they buying it because it tasted great? And if it was because it tasted great, is there any issue with just labeling it with Irish whiskey that is great, rather than worrying about what it's called?
That's a very good point. I think we should call it pot still, firstly, because it is pot still. And so there's no point in lying. Everything just needs to be genuine. And then the other point is that, I think people drank pot still because it had that taste of being pot still. And even at the time, whenever, you know, coffee stills were being used in Ireland and in Scotland, people still would have gone for a pot still because they knew what a pot still was, and they didn't want to go for this smooth column still stuff. They wanted to go for a pot still. And I think you would have reached for one. The reason why it fell out of fashion was because of social and economic reasons, and other reasons, things that were happening in the States. And right. Unfortunately, Irish whiskey had to reinvent itself with something. And I'm delighted that pot still has been kept alive, and credit to the people who have done that. But at the same time, historical accuracy, there's no point in, you know, ignoring history.
Right.
And saying it's tradition is a cop-out.
So whether the legislation or the technical descriptions change or not, I get the sense that you're going to keep making whiskey the way you want to make whiskey, which is earthy, vegetable forward, old styles using old mash bills. Whether you can call it pot still or not, it's not going to stop you, is it?
No, we're calling it pot still, and it's going to be pot still. I don't know why. Everything we do has to be honest. So it's as simple as that. Yeah.
I'm trying to give you an angle to walk out of there to reverse out, but no, I'm a big admirer of your approach, and I think you should be. I think you should be questioning accuracies and descriptions. I'm curious with your mash bills then, if the current day mash bills don't represent perhaps historical definitions of what a pot still was, and we know that in the past there were many more grain components or higher percentages. Where are you getting your recipes from then, and what are you using as an influence to create your own mash bills that are unique to Killowen?
Yeah, I hear you. So, for example, you know, the old Bow Street distilleries and the old Dublin distilleries, pot still distilleries, you know, they actually do have up to 30% oats, rye and wheat, as does certain ones in Cork and in County Down. So that's what we're following. But then we have done experimental ones that we won't be calling a pot still. Certainly won't. Like if we have to do say 90% rye, 10% malt, there's no chance I'm going to call that a pot still because I'll accept that it isn't. But if it correlates with historical reference, then yeah, I think that we will, you know. But there's some ones out there that we won't. We wouldn't want to tarnish the name pot still.
So we don't see oats and wheat used very much in Irish whiskey, certainly not over the past 10, 20 years. It hasn't been used a lot. We're seeing some brands starting to use oats, Drumshanbo, for example, and others, Blackwater. Tell me why oats or wheat or rye matter in whiskey production and what kind of difference they make to the end product.
Yeah, by all means, yeah. If you've ever had porridge, you know, or if you've sometimes, you know, the traditional way of probably making it and leaving it lying. And I know in our home, our mother would have made it, and then the next morning it's lying in a pot, and it would almost congeal, and that's because it's just so full of oiliness. And whenever you distill, it's absolutely full of oiliness as well. That whenever it comes through, and oil is a vessel for flavour. That's why we like fatty foods so much, because they hold on flavours. If you've got oiliness in your mash bill, and then you've got this unmalted barley component, which is very peppery and a little bit of, you know, those grassiness in there and hay. And then if you've got your rye in there, and rye is great, only need a small quantity of it, has been historically used. It's an absolute spice bomb. You've got this real spicy palate, and the oats is holding it all together. And then you've got your malted barley, which is absolutely delicious. Those basically the honey biscuity notes, and all together that just makes a marriage. It's just fantastic. And we've done it now, and we've had it in a cask for a year, and it's because of the slow way that we distill, that very slow process. All of the sulfates are coming out of it. It's ready to drink now, and it's amazing stuff. You know, it's great.
What have been the challenges of distilling, fermenting with these different mash bills? Have you had any explosions, implosions, anything that has gone wrong because of these new approaches?
There has been no explosions in the distillery, for health and safety reasons. So everything's been safe there. We also malt out the back, so we've got a little shed, and we get turf from the Mourne Mountains and from Donegal as well. So that the turf from the Mourne Mountains is much more cold sort of nose on it, and the turf from Donegal is you know, there's much more mossiness in it, and it's lovely floral aromas from it. But whenever so there's a bit of flaming out there as well, but everything's safe. But whenever we're mashing, you're right, there's been a few incidences. We mash by hand. As you see in the video, we do it with boat paddles. Everything's done from hand from start to finish. Everything's transferred from hand. It's very laborious, you know, but we think whenever you do that, it shows up at the end. You know, would you rather have a homemade bun or one that you would buy in a large supermarket, which would taste better? And whenever we're mashing, for example, when we put in a high quantity of rye, it just sticks together like glue. So that was one of our experimental non-pot still, by the way, mash bills. And we broke, our member of staff, Pierce Carr, broke 3 paddles. You know, so it was unfortunate. It meant that we had nothing to mix with for a few days, except for a big stick. But yeah, so it is blood, sweat, and tears, literally, going into what we do.
Do you love whiskey that much that it's worth it? That it's worth fighting the technical file? That it's worth fighting the porridge that you have to stir and break 3 paddles? Do you love whiskey that much?
I think we're must be bred into being from Ulster. That's all we do is fight the rest of the country for hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, so yeah, we've been left on our own devices up here for long enough, and yeah, well, by all means, it's worth fighting. But it's we're doing the right thing, so why wouldn't we? You know,
Brendan the Fighter Carty in Killowen.
Anybody who comes and tastes it, you know, does recognise that, you know, that we're missing the trick here. For God's sake, if there's some really good distilleries in Scotland that are doing this now, and it's actually it was written out of the Scottish whiskey history, but we're not going to bloody write it out of ours for a halfway house of 5%. Whenever we've got so much potential there, you know, there's nothing to lose. Everybody should be doing it. Right. The Scots are starting to do it now, and they're calling it a grain, but they have full information written on their bottle, and there's some amazing examples there. There's America, for example. There's so much pot still being made in America right now, There's a few being released in Ireland that are probably released a little bit too early, but they're still good. And there's a huge future there, and I think we need to delve into it. Like, did you ever taste, for example, the rye that was released by Quebecan? Like, it's the closest thing to pot still that we have as well, and it should have been called pot still. It really should have.
Pot still when it was distilled, wasn't it? It was pot still when it first went into a barrel, and then it changed in the barrel magically.
Exactly, and it's beautiful. It really is, and so it's a shame that it's.
So pot still is a particular passion of yours. Are you distilling any other expression in your styles of Irish whiskey, or will only be pot still?
No, that's it so far. Just apart from a couple of experimental mashes, like the one. No, yeah, that's it. Then basically, yeah.
When I say pot still, it's to be clear, per the technical file, it's your current interpretation or your version of pot still, some of which complies and some of which doesn't comply yet.
Yeah,
but it's still.
It just so happens that all of the stuff that doesn't comply is also peated, and the stuff that does comply is non-peated.
So tell me about the whiskey. So while you're releasing this experimental series, you're laying down whiskey. How much whiskey are you laying down on an average week? How many barrels would you fill on an average week?
Pre-COVID, we produced 70 litres a week, or 70 litres a day, 4 days a week. So we get about a barrel or something a week,
Barrel a week.
So we sold 15 casks as well, and we still have 3 of those to fill. And there's a lot of demand for the casks, and we really appreciate people's interest. But it's quite difficult to fill our own casks and other people's casks, because you have to think of the future sustainability of the company as well. But anybody who does apply, we put their name down and probably look to getting them sorted in the future. Yeah, we produce as much as we can, but it's a very small batch. And considering we don't like watering down our whiskey as well, it means that it just becomes much smaller batch all the time. If we were to water it down, we could probably stretch it, but we don't intend doing that.
So the size in terms of scale, like to give listeners and viewers some sense of that scale and how micro the distilling is. Dingle Distillery, when I last visited, was distilling a couple of barrels a day, and that's a small distillery, and they were doing a couple of barrels a day, and I thought that was the smallest number I'd ever heard. And now, by comparison, you're doing perhaps a barrel a week, to give some sense of scale. How do the economics work in a business of that scale?
It's a tough business model, we've got a very small, 10 meters by 10 meter shed in the first instance, so it is small. But you're right, there's huge operational costs in the business too, and we also produce poaching, which we sell, and the poaching's flame fed as well. It's got a completely different character. Poaching's absolutely fantastic stuff. I love it, and I think I'll just grab one of them now. That's it there. It's a similar style of bottle, copper pots distilled. The back of the bottle as well, we've gone through the transparency thing. We've given the mash bill of how to make it. Now, this isn't the same as our whiskey, our pot still whiskey, but it's actually quite similar. We've tailored the mash bill slightly so that the mash bill would I think it's much more palatable now at this stage. But you get a lovely earthy notes in there as well, and you get vanillas as well from the grain, believe it or not. A little bit of like forestry pine notes too, but then you get those lovely sweet, those honey notes and biscuity notes in there too. And it really is a great drink. And a lot of cocktail makers are going bananas for it because of its versatility and versatility. And it's there's a high alcohol content. It's 48%, but there's packed full of flavour, absolutely packed full of flavour, and a little bit of it goes a long way.
I'd say you're not the first distiller in the Mourne Mountains to be making poaching.
No, you're dead right. There's a lot of stories of it from where we are, right over to Kilcoo, where Mommy's family's from, and she would always tell stories about the poaching stills and the British soldiers coming up to seize the stills as well, and people leaving the worm hidden in the river and running over the commonage. There's lots of stories, and in that spot today, there's still a poaching maker. But yeah, and right where we are, there was a poaching maker right up the top of the hill, up and down White's Cottages. So there wasn't too many.
You have a license to distill yours.
Exactly, by all means. And I never made any poaching before this.
I believe you. I'm not going to dive further into that. We're skirting the law already with some of the conversations, so we won't go further into poaching. So while you're laying down whiskey, and obviously the stills are of a certain size where you don't have multiple sets of stills where you can have multiple different things being distilled at the same time, spirits at the same time. So you're using the still for whiskey, you're cleaning it out, you're using it for poaching, you're cleaning it out, using it for gin. That's a lot of work, a lot of effort. Gin, poaching, and whiskey, are they so they're the three things that you were making pre-COVID. What about vodka? Were you making vodka?
No, we're not actually making vodka, but we tried a bit of rum for the fun of it. A lot of molasses and sugar. We bought it in, and it's been great fun. Whenever we make our gin, we've got a doubler, a thumper keg, basically. So we attach it on through the line arm. It's a huge big piece of. They're not used in Ireland. It's much more like the Caribbean model. So we put our botanicals in there for our gin, which we pick around the Mourne Mountains ourselves, our native botanical gin, and it's actually lovely. Sometimes gin is great, it's very refreshing, especially this weather, which is why this bottle's bloody empty. And all the botanicals are written at the back there as well. So it's great fun. And the thumper keg is great because it maximises interaction with the copper in there as well. So a lot more inefficient because it slows the whole process down even more. But whenever you use that, it acts as another 50% of a distillation. So if you've got one still and you have two thumper kegs, for example, it acts like a double distillation. So but if you've got one still and half a thumper keg, it's an extra half a distillation. So whenever you're running rum through there, it acts as much more interaction with the copper. So whenever you've got your molasses in there, it strips out those sulfates and it makes a very interesting rum. And again, the rum that we've got laid down is only a very small amount of it, but it's so full-bodied and it's great fun, and we can't wait to release it whenever it's ready.
I know from the comments that there's a ton of interest in your own whiskey when it is finally matured. And I want to take some questions from the audience that I want to put to you. But before I do, when do you intend to release a whiskey? Do you have a date in mind, or are you just waiting to see when it's right to be released?
I think we're going to just be transparent and let people follow what we're doing. So I'm going to release it after 3 years. I think it will be ready after 3 years too, because of the slow way in which we do things. I want to prove that as a new theory, a new way of doing things, to show that the worm tub and the slowness and the flame fade and half filling your still rather than full filling your still, and that really slow process, and that I think my whole plan is that the whiskey will be ready after 3 years, and I'm confident that it will be. And yeah.
So we can follow along the journey. We can see it at 3 years. We can see it at 4 years. We can see it at 5 years, and follow along.
And then get some shipped out to California.
We'll have to get some over here. I see there's comments there asking when we can get it to Ohio. I know one of the questions is about whether this is available in the US. And I see Liam is in there doing your answering for you, talking about the fact that this some of your whiskey will see its way to the US by the end of the year. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've got big plans out there. Big plans for us, which is probably four or five casks. For us, that's massive. For other people, it's a sneeze, but yeah, it's definitely going out there. So it's Killowen and another brand, Two Stacks, that Liam and Shane own. This has recently been registered out in the States. And again, Two Stacks is absolutely full of transparency. And the way the guys are doing it, they own part of Killowen as well. So the three of us are childhood friends. They come from a little place called Hilltown in the centre of the Mourne Mountains, a lovely small village. And they're going to be, they help me up in the distillery sometimes, so they're going to be bottling in the distillery. So Killowen and Two Stacks are both going out at the same time to the States.
Oh, fantastic.
And, so yeah, maybe I'll get chatting with those guys sometime in this as well.
Absolutely. I know I had a chat with Liam previously, and I think we're due another chat again. But some other questions about, like, poaching is such an Irish thing, and there's American versions with moonshine, etc. But here's a good question that I often hear, and I'd love to get your answer to this. What's the difference between poaching and an unaged whiskey, or new make spirit? What's the difference between the two?
Good man, Andrew. Yeah, now, poaching, the name poaching means little pot in Irish. It's our oldest native spirit. Everybody would have had a poaching still at home, or a lot of people would have nearby before it was made illegal. And there's a bar in Dublin, 1661, and Dave's doing a great job at reviving the category as well. There's a good few poachings in Ireland. Some of them are a bit dodgy, unfortunately. So there's a GI that governs what poaching is. And the GI for poaching, just like the GI for pot still whiskey, is corrupted. And it says that you can make poaching from whey, and that was never the case. And it says you can make it from molasses, which was actually more recently the case, but not so much. And so poaching, there probably isn't a huge difference, to be honest, between certain moonshines and poaching. But the definition for a moonshine is very wishy-washy as well. But I think the idea of a poaching, in my opinion, is that poaching is made from grain. And if you were to age it, it could be a whiskey. Yeah, and much more likely, poaching was made from mixed mash bills.
Very good. Lots of very positive comments about your new make spirit, Dahi, fellow whiskey industry gentleman as well. He tasted your peated pot still, so you've got you're using peated barley as well. Tell us a little bit about that, about the peated pot still.
Yeah, good man, Dahi. Dahi's doing some lovely stuff there with WD O'Connell. Good man.
He is.
Great stuff. So yeah, peated. We do buy in some peated pot still, or some peated grain, but not all grains can be peated. And our oats that we use in our mash bills are actually grown locally. There's a threshing festival in Killowen every year, which is done for charity. So the distillery would buy some of the grain from some of the oats from the threshing festival, and we want more peatedness more peat in our peated whiskey. So we would peat smoke our own oats ourselves on site. So we've got a shed out the side, and we use turf to do that. Turf being peat, and we smoke our own grain on site, and it just adds another element. But if you add oats to your whiskey, it completely changes the style of your whiskey, completely changes the flavour. If you add malted oats, it's a whole world of different flavour. It's crazy. But whenever you've peat malted oats, it's just this other dimension of flavour, this biscuity oatiness that it's almost this nostalgic flavour biscuits. It's amazing. And
I've not heard of anybody else doing peated malted oats in their whiskey, in their Irish whiskey yet. Whether that's been done behind the scenes or not. Are you another trailblazer on that side of things?
I think we are, but I'm sure there's probably one or two that are working on it behind the scenes, and they're keeping it quiet. But I hope it starts, because it's a massive part of our history. Oats was such a crucial part of our diet, even though the whole country was flooded with potatoes at one stage. Oats was still a massive part of our diet. It isn't just horse feed. It was always used, and before the potato, it was our diet, and during the potato times, it was still our diet. And yeah, it was used for making poaching for a very long time. It's got a very low yield, but the actual character that it brings, and whenever you malt it, it turns into powder. You lose so much as well, but the amount of it's worth it. The amount of character it brings to a whiskey is fascinating.
It's incredible the amount of inefficiencies you're choosing to pursue in pursuit of this perfect whiskey. Like your passion for whiskey is obvious, right? It's clear. And it reminds me of a little bit like what Mark Rainier is doing in Waterford, taking far longer than it needs to, spending far more money than is necessary to create something that is maybe true to his beliefs. And I'm getting the sense that you're immovable on those beliefs.
Yeah, it has to be done. You taste the difference in the new make. It's so true, Double distillation is inefficient that way as well. They say that triple distillation is more efficient. They say they do it for extra smoothness. You don't do it for extra smoothness, you do it for efficiency. But maybe they do it for smoothness as well. But yeah, all of these things we do are highly inefficient. But whenever you taste the end product, it's much better. It really is.
So for those who are not familiar with Killowen, and for those who are used to perhaps more mainstream whiskey brands, I really encourage and implore you to go out and find brands, whiskies from people like Brendan, who are not just putting their money where their mouth is, they're pushing the envelope in areas that maybe some others don't want the envelope pushed in, but they're doing interesting things because they have very strongly held beliefs. And we don't want a homogenous vanilla industry. We want a transparent, we want a diverse industry, I think, if we're to truly reflect our past and take advantage of the future with Irish whiskey. So I'd encourage everybody, if you're going out shopping for Irish whiskey, look out for the smaller brands like Killowen, because and the likes of Dahi's whiskies, Bill Phil, etc. There's a lot of work gone into them, and there's not a lot of money being made on these whiskies by the producers. And Brendan, I'm sure, will attest to that as well, that this is a labor of love right now that at some point will become a profitable business, hopefully.
Exactly. Every bloody bottle, we stick the labels on by hand, bottle it by hand. We write the numbers of units in the back by hand, write the percentage, number of the bottles by hand. Wax dipping, it takes so long to wax dip. We got a slow cooker, we fill it full of wax pellets, we dip the bottle in, and yeah, it's every one of those things takes an extra day. And
well, I definitely expect you not to have a fast cooker, because everything else you're doing is purposefully slow, just like the slow food movement, which is a good thing, because the slow food movement makes us stop and take our time and think and reflect on the ingredients and what goes into them, into the dishes that we eat. And I love this slower approach to distillation and fermentation and maturation as well. We have some questions though regarding the first release that you will put out there eventually. And there's a man with a suspiciously similar name to your own here asking, what type of cask will your first distilled whiskey be aged in?
Our first one was actually a PX sherry cask. Yeah, so that's Sean. Sean's a lovely wee fella from Liverpool. So yeah, we aged this is the first cask we got, and we put it into it, and it was non-GI on purpose. We had to do it, so it's non-GI peated. And unfortunately, we've been too generous with people who we appreciate, visitors, and a lot of people have dipped in and tasted it over the months. And yeah, it's so drinkable at this stage that it's unbelievable. And yeah, it's going to be the PX, and it'll not be a full cask now when we release it, unfortunately.
Because everyone's been dipping in and trying a little bit as they visit. You'll have to stop the tours.
It is, but now it's got a big no on the front of it. No one else is allowed in.
Brendan, this is the third release in the Bonded Experimental series. Will there be more experimental releases between now and the time you release your whiskey?
Yeah, there definitely will be. Yeah, and it's becoming more popular as well, so it's sort of hard to divide it up. And we also distribute in Germany too. We've got a partner out there, Maracas Spitzer, and she's brilliant. She's Irish Whiskies DE, and the collection of whiskies they have is fantastic. They also support brands like JJ Carty and that as well, so she's excellent. And the caliber of whiskies they have is growing, and it's better, and they're giving. They understand out there what our consumers are understanding. They're nearly ahead of the game, compared to any other country. And so I don't know how. The other whiskey releases, yeah. So on the next release, we're going to decide how do we divide it up, because we love the local area having it. So it's all scattered around my local area, and then we make sure a certain amount goes to Dublin and whoever else wants some. And then Irish Malts ship a lot of it about the place online as well. And so it's hard to know, like, on the next release, should we probably release two at the same time? Would there be a demand for it? Would people like to see it? Or is that too hard for some of our collectors? Because like myself, all of the people who buy our whiskey, they're not very, we're not going for the super rich, we're going for normal people. So we try to make it as affordable as possible, despite all the
small batch, isn't it? I mean, like, this is bottle number 211 of 388.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah,
there's going to be at least three more.
At least three more.
Yeah.
So pre-COVID, you were pumping out your half to 1 full barrel a week, and then I know you paused some of that because you were helping out with frontline workers. So you turned your attention, didn't you, to making hand sanitizer? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we just started dishing it out at the start, and to people who needed it, frontline services, NHS. My other half has a huge amount of affiliation. She basically saved the local hospital here. We've been under a regime of Tory cuts for a very long time. We've been cutting the NHS to shreds. So when a disaster like this happened, they weren't able to fend for themselves. So it's nearly as bad as the NHS in the south. But anyway, sorry. But so we're basically flooding as much as we can in there. Yeah, and there's a huge factory beside us, Norbrook, who have recently joined in with us to supply a lot of chemicals in there as well, and alcohol. So we're collaborating together and we're dishing out as much as we can. We even drove down to Dublin and gave some to the Peter McVerry Trust. So Father Peter McVerry was he's actually from Newry originally. So we're getting it out there to as much places as we can. And any charity that gets in touch, if I haven't dropped it out to you so far, I'm very sorry. It's just been very busy. But we have more there, and we are continuing to give out to charities. So if there's any charities out there need some, please do get in touch. But I do have to give a special shout out to Ecklandville Distillery. Ecklandville Distillery are not commissioned directly by the government to create hand sanitizer, yet they are creating more hand sanitizer than any other distillery on the island. And I mean that more than any other, and they haven't even been directly commissioned, and they give up what they were doing to do so, which is an absolute fantastic thing. And they're not looking for praise for it, and they haven't told anybody about this, but I know it because whenever I meet a shortfall, I get in touch and they help me out, and they have done so with other county down distilleries, and so much so that two of the biggest distilleries in Scotland have actually reached out to them and asked them for hand sanitizer. And it just shows you that everybody's in the same boat together, and it's great to see that everybody isn't just trying to make a few pounds. They realise they're in a position of responsibility and they step up to the mark. So I won't be taking up the credit for that. Everybody has to.
You won't take credit for it, but I think it's incumbent upon me and others to give you credit because it's already an expensive undertaking to operate a distillery in the least efficient way possible, as you have chosen to do, and then to stop this least efficient way of producing whiskey and spirits to create the alcohol needed for hand sanitizer is an incredible gesture. It's bigger than a gesture. It's totally in line with your firmly held beliefs of what's right, and that is expressed in how you produce whiskey, but it's also expressed in how you decide not to produce whiskey so that you can produce alcohol for hand sanitizer. And I want to say thank you for what you're doing, and I know Ecklandville are doing incredible things too. And I can tell from the comments, like from Kieran, that the support that you're giving the local community is very much appreciated. And I know so many distilleries have taken cuts and had to lay people off and have had to make big changes in this new way of living that hopefully isn't with us for too long. But amazing to see the work that you're doing with the hand sanitizer, and the community is in awe of what you're doing. So I want to make sure that's said.
Thank you very much.
Let me see a couple of other questions that I've got for you that have come in. And again, if anybody's got any questions for Brendan before we let him go to bed, because he's had a week of it dealing with all kinds of things at the distillery. We've got lots of questions about coming to America. So many of our audience in Indiana, in Ohio, in California, in Colorado, in Washington State are looking for the whiskeys, which is good news. And that is a great sign, and I'm not surprised they're looking for it. I'm a firm believer that when people understand the process, the approach, the passion behind a whiskey, it makes us want to try it. It makes us want to understand and learn more about it. And as you're telling me about the char in the bottle, I'm going back tasting more to see, okay, what can I detect and understand? And I think many others are doing the same. Let me see. Sean wants to know my thoughts on the Killowen tequila cask. Yeah, so I've been sipping it away really slowly here, and I'm not a tequila fan normally, but I've been a big fan of tequila finishes lately and tequila contribution from the likes of JJ Carty and now from Brendan here in Killowen. Again, there's a white pepper note that just doesn't leave the back of my tongue, and it then leads into a hot spice, a pepper spice that just sits on the back and gives it a lovely length to it. It doesn't feel like it's 55%. It doesn't have that heat, there's a lovely polish to it that tames that ABV. I mean, I wouldn't add any water to that myself now. Would you put a few drops in when you're drinking it?
No, I wouldn't. I think the last one, the Chocolina, I like to put a tiny drop in. It opened up those fruity notes, but this one took a step away more to those peppery notes that you're saying, more savory notes. Although it's not quite the whole way over there, certainly getting onto that side of the palate. But no, that's perfect for me.
As we're sipping on this, tell me a little bit about the plans to share these whiskies. I know many whiskey fairs and conventions, etc., have been postponed or in question. The likes of Whiskey Live in Dublin or in Paris. Do you have any plans of introducing some of these whiskies at any of those shows over the coming months, if possible?
Yeah, we unfortunately missed one in Germany, which is very upsetting. So I'm looking forward to getting back out there. But as soon as once we launch in California, we'll be going there. I'd say it would be great to get our name out. So we're looking forward to the partnerships out there too, and we've a lot of friends out there and people looking forward to tasting our stuff. And we might actually we'll have a special release for California as well. It's only going to be small bottles, mind you, at 330 pounds. We get it out. So we've got the stuff ready for bottling now. And,
you can stay in my place. I'll make the bed for you. I'll make you a cup of tea when you come out.
Very good. That's good. But yeah, so that's one anyway. But as for Ireland, Cork, for example, Cork Whisky Society would love to get in touch. I'd go down there and do a tasting. It's only a couple of hours down the road, but now the motorway has been built. And but most people get the stuff through Whisky Club Belfast, which if all the whisky clubs in Ireland all got together, Whisky Club Belfast would beat them all. It's absolutely fantastic. It really is. It's
Isn't that right?
so much fun. The biggest pile of headers you'd ever meet in your life, and the caliber of whiskies, the connections that Paul has as well. He gets whiskies from all the best things in Scotland, even not so good ones from all around the world. And so it's really interesting.
Hopefully some of those shows go ahead, and I know many of them are transitioning to online, and I know it's easier in Ireland and England to get samples to people than it is in the United States, sadly. And so hopefully that's happening. I see Liam was talking about Belfast Whisky Week going to be great online.
Belfast Whisky Week is going to be phenomenal. I don't think there's ever been a whisky week like it, and it's a festival. It's a Belfast Whisky Festival. So it started off as Whisky Week last year, and it's all going to be online, and we've got comedians at it. There's live music at it. All of the people who've applied will start getting the stuff shipped out to them, and the boxes, the caliber of the stuff that's been sent out, is phenomenal. And there's so much stuff that's being pushed out that doesn't exist yet, or doesn't exist at all, and it's well worth looking out for. Get in touch with Whisky Club Belfast for that, and it's going to be amazing.
A question we got from JJ in Canada regarding one of your previous releases in the Bonded Experimental series regarding the Tequila casks. Where were they sourced? Can you explain what those types of casks are for those who've not heard of them before?
Yeah, so JJ, thanks very much for your question. But Tequila is an indigenous wine to the Basque country, which is north of Spain, south of France. And the Basques have had their own language. The oldest language in Europe. It's not an Indo-European language. And likewise, their culture, everything about them is ancient, and it's fascinating. They also have their own variety of grape. Now, the Basque country is tiny, considering that they have their own indigenous grape as well, which it's quite a cold, moist country. So they have this grape, which is very small, large pips, and a thick skin. So whenever you make a wine from it, it's very tannic, it's very bitter, it's very tarty, and it creates almost an aggressive wine. So whenever they pour it, they tend to pour it from the height to try and aerate it, so it becomes more mellow on your palate. Fascinating stuff. It's snubbed by some wine critics and it's loved by others. But one thing about it, it's bloody honest, and that's what I love about it. And we got some of it's aged and some of it isn't. We got a wine cask that was from the Basque country, and we took the heads off the cask and we replaced it with virgin acacia wood heads, which had the same sort of flavour. So we were trying to really exaggerate that side of the flavour profile. You get a lot of white pepper in there and wood spice, but at the same time you get a lot of tarty peach. And the County Antrim element of our stock paired with that very well, and they're almost clashing together. So you got this fruit bomb explosion. And our whole idea was to try and juxtapose those three releases. So you've got the dark rum, which is very vanilla heavy, and then you've got this here really tarty orchard fruit one in between, which was the Chocolino wine, and then now you've got the tequila, which we were trying to reach more towards earthy notes. So we're trying to show that what you can do with casks finishes, But that was an interesting cask.
What part of the Basque country would they have been sourced from?
It was more towards Bilbao. So if you look at the Basque country, you've got the back part of it, which is all the highland rural area. Then you've got San Sebastian and you've got Bilbao. San Sebastian, they're much more elaborate and fancy in the way they do things. Bilbao, they're much more, I suppose, a bit brutally honest. In San Sebastian, they pour your wine from a height. so they're much more in the theatre. In Bilbao, they tend to do things a little bit more down to earth, and so there's a clash of ideas and cultures within the country, and which is fascinating in itself.
There's only a couple of hundred people across the channels right now tuned in. So between you and me, because there's nobody listening, between you and me, is there anything you'd like to share privately with me right now here, when it's just you and me talking to one another, about what your plans might be, or anything we should know about or get excited about coming from Killowen?
What, in the not too distant future, or next releases?
Whenever you'd like to share, yeah.
God, I don't actually. God, that's a really tough one. I tend to tell as much as I possibly can, but yeah, no, we've got 3 more releases coming up, and we're going to fight tooth and nail. We're not standing for the GA. Doesn't matter what any lobby group who assumes authority over a whiskey industry that's existed for much longer than they have. We are not backing down. We're making pot still whiskey the right way, and that's it.
So everyone who's watching or listening, you're being introduced to Brendan the Fighter Carty, who is determined to defend his beliefs about what pot still is, and I, for one, am excited to see the results of your efforts in that area, because innovation sometimes needs some apple carts to be turned over, and it needs new things to be done. And I think you sound to me like a fella that's willing to do both of those things, and you have no interest in keeping apple carts upright. They don't look very nice standing up. No.
Definitely not. No, with full respect to everybody in the industry,
yes.
I can't think of one group of whiskey makers in the country who are doing things wrong. Everybody's doing things their own way, and the diversity is fascinating and fair play, and we're all going to keep growing together, and have full respect for every single organisation, and it's great. There's such a solidarity out there. It's great, and we just have to be very proud. We could pause now and look at how well we're doing. It might never be as good as this again. It's just brilliant.
I think you make an important distinction. You're fighting for changes to technical descriptions and legal definitions, but you're doing so not at the expense of other distillers or other makers. And I think that's an important distinction, because one observation I've had in the short time that I've been lucky enough to be somewhat tangential to the Irish whiskey community is that there's a great sense of camaraderie and community, and those who are pushing the boundaries are not criticizing those that are within the boundaries, but rather saying, we love what you've done. Have you ever thought of adding this on top of it? Or have you ever thought of changing this? And I see that so much now in coming from bonders and those who are purchasing casks from distilleries and finishing them themselves, that they're adding a new layer, a new flavor, a new profile, something else. It's additive. And I think as long as all of these pushes and moves and blends that come out from different approaches are additive to the industry, I think we should celebrate them. It's when we're cutting others down, which is not in any way what you're doing. I think that would be the danger, wouldn't it?
Exactly. No, there's full solidarity and absolutely full respect for what everybody's doing, and it's fantastic. We're just going to continue to grow. Every step one person makes is a step for everybody else. We're a growing industry, and there's a long way to go yet. We can't start fighting each other.
That's it.
We have to stay together. Yep.
Well, I think we have answered quite a few of the questions, Brendan. There's probably a few there that'll be worth diving into in your own time online afterwards, regarding some of the mash bills, etc. That might be some technical questions, but I'm very excited about what you're doing in Killowen. I had hoped, as you might remember, to come up and visit you when I was last in Ireland, and we couldn't, through all the things down south of Dublin. I couldn't get up by the Mourne Mountains, but I hope to do that next time. And I hope the cat is still there, because I'm a big fan of cats. So I'd like a whiskey with you and the cat, and we'll sit outside, look out over the scenery, and we'll talk about the char that's in our mouth that's come from the whiskey in the glass, and that'll be a good day.
Wonderful. No, yeah, you'll be most welcome. I can't wait. And likewise, anybody else, you're always welcome in Killowen. Definitely.
Well, Brendan, thanks a million for joining me today. I know it's late in Ireland, but you've been an absolute legend and a fantastic contributor. Really excited to see the boundaries that continue to be pushed, and we're going to keep a close eye. And I know there's lots of Americans over here interested in your releases. So when you do know that you're coming over here, be sure to give me a bell, and the welcome mat will be rolled out, and a cup of tea and a drop of whiskey be ready for you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. You're reminding me of them, man. That's the big kind slap. Come on.
Thanks, Brendan. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
No.
That is Brendan Carty, entrepreneur, founder of the Killowen Distillery, and I think you'll agree with me, an absolute legend. Somebody who has very strongly held beliefs, somebody who is acting on those beliefs, and somebody who is putting his money where his mouth is, even when there's no money to be made at this early stage. And that's no small undertaking, for anybody to make, especially in these uncertain times. And for him to stop his distillation of his money-making or attempt at money-making in these early stages, whiskey and gin and poaching and rum, in order to serve those on the front lines, is a testament to his character. And so I love meeting and hearing from these unique characters that are behind the products. Because if I saw that on the shelf, I wouldn't know anything about it. I wouldn't know whether I should support this brand or not. And I think that we buy from brands and we buy from businesses that we tend to support or maybe believe in. And I, for one, believe that those who are willing to innovate at their own expense and push the envelope are worth supporting as well. So that was Brendan Carty from Killowen, and that was our first whiskey. So an hour and 20 minutes in, and we're only one whiskey in. We are now going to move on to our second whiskey of the evening. Let me look at the questions. Eamon says he's a great, passionate speaker. He absolutely is, and I think there's a further conversation to be had with Brendan as he does more in Killowen, and the same with Liam, who I see in the comments as well. Yeah, when we bring on really interesting people, I can just sit back and let them talk, because they have far more knowledge and insights to share than I could ever possibly muster. And so the more we can find great, and there's so many of them, those behind the whiskey that we can bring on and chat, be it on the podcast or here in the live stream, we're going to do more of that. Chris said that he talked too quickly for the subtitles. Well, he might say the same about me with my Cork accent, like we might say about those from Northern Ireland. But yeah, there are subtitles that are auto-generated for those, especially in the United States. Good night to Brendan from Mick. Yes, Ashley says that's a man who has beliefs. Absolutely, it really is. Peter is going to look for that on the shelves in Colorado. So for those of you who are in the United States and who are members of the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group, let me throw that up here to make sure that you can see it. That's where we'll share details of those events and releases that are happening in the United States. So I'm going to stay as close as I can to the makers, the producers, the distillers, the blenders, the bonders in Ireland, so that when there comes a release or there comes time to be a release in the United States, I'll share details of it, and we'll try and do some events through our group and eventually in person around the United States. And all of that will start, and will maybe the genesis of those things will happen in the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group. So please go in and join that. Even if you're not in Ireland and you want to learn about what Americans and those around the country and around the different parts of America are drinking and thinking about Irish whiskey, it's a great place to be. Everybody's welcome. It is, of course, very American-centered, as it should be, because I'm here in America and I'm very selfish and I'm making it all about me. But most fans are certainly American, but anybody's welcome to join. So Stephen said that he's here to be an interpreter for those from Northern Ireland. So Stephen, you're doing the Lord's work. Thanks for joining us on that. And we might need you again with more Northerners. So we are going to stay north of the border. There's no borders in Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey is one of the few, I think one of the only geographical indicated protected products, food or drinks, that spans two countries. It spans both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom. And the phrase, the term Irish whiskey can be used on both sides of the border uniquely. And we are staying north of the border, which of course is a notional border when it comes to Irish whiskey. We are staying in the north to open our next whiskey, which is a drop of Bushmills Original, which many of you will be familiar with. And as Jeff says, yes, this is from not Cork. We have no Cork whiskies at all tonight. Everything coming to us tonight is from not Cork. So where is Bushmills? Bushmills is not too far away from Killowen. Here you'll see it on the screen. Bushmills is in Northern Ireland, small town in County Antrim, small village called Bushmills. And Bushmills claims and we can argue about whether they're right or they're wrong. Bushmills claims to be the oldest licensed distillery in the world, and I'm down for that debate anytime, and I'm sure if we brought on representatives of the Kilbeggan distillery, they might argue about who in fact had the first license pertaining to the distillery as opposed to the area. But that's neither here nor there, and I'm happy to take that debate in the comments and for anyone to add in their thoughts on what's the oldest licensed distillery in the world. In any case, we're drinking from a bottle from a company, from a distillery that claims to be the oldest licensed distillery in the world. 1608 is the charter that was granted to them to distill whiskey, and through many events over the years, they have been distilling through fires and through all kinds of things. They have continued virtually unbroken distillation since that time. So this is a short little stop for us because we're about to head southwest down to Dingle in the southwest corner of Ireland, one of the closest parishes to New York. We're going to head down to Dingle. But before we do, we're going to have a little sip of Bushmills, and I'm going to read the questions while I'm sipping on this. But this is a blended whiskey. Bushmills, of course, in Northern Ireland only makes one style of whiskey. They only make single malt. So when we see a blended whiskey like this, as in what Bushmills is, that has got a percentage of malted whiskey and a percentage of grain, maize, corn that is used in it, that maize or corn will come from somewhere else. And in this case, it comes from the Midleton distillery. And so Midleton and Bushmills are great friends and great buddies and work well together across that invisible whiskey border to supply each other with the grain that the other doesn't have. And Midleton does supply the grain component. So I think approximately 55% malted malt whiskey in this compared to about 45% grain whiskey. It's a light, floral, easy to drink whiskey, blended whiskey. One of the four staples in Irish homes growing up, Bushmills, Paddy, Powers and Jameson would have been the four whiskies that would have made an appearance in everyone's home. One of them would have been in everyone's home anyway in Ireland growing up. Oh, it's just a lovely, easy to drink, as they say on the label, smooth and mellow. Some people think the word smooth should only be applied to tables, but I know the Irish whiskey industry has been using the word smooth for a long, long time, and it's a tough one to shake. I'll put it up here. Mellow is a great description. I love the phrase mellow. But Bushmills is a really interesting distillery that, of course, at one time was part of the Irish Distillers portfolio. So Irish Distillers, that was formed in 1966 with the merger of Powers and Jameson and the Cork Distilleries Company. Three of them merged together in the Republic of Ireland to do their best to stave off the threats of the Scots, and in doing so probably saved Irish whiskey together with their French friends in the 1980s who came on board to acquire Irish Distillers. But Bushmills would have been part of the portfolio for a number of years, and it is now, it then changed hands a number of times and is now part of a much larger drinks company, a Mexican tequila company, Jose Cuervo family you might be familiar with, that Bushmills is part of. But it is a lovely, easy sipping whiskey, and obviously a very storied whiskey. They don't release as many whiskies as many people would like them to release. They have access to very old stock. They've obviously been distilling for a long, long time, and they have access to very, very old whiskies that don't tend to make it out under their own name. And sometimes those whiskies are acquired by third parties or sold on to other distilleries or other bottlers or bonders to use in their own whiskies. But I think we'd all love to see more from Bushmills with their own name on it. My favorite single malt in the world is Bushmills 21-year-old. I wish it was a little bit higher in terms of its ABV, but it is the most beautiful single malt I've ever tasted. Now, I have not tasted as many people here on the stream, so I'm open to being introduced to more. But Bushmills 21 is a extraordinary single malt from Bushmills, and I'd love to see more older age statement whiskies from Bushmills that utilize some of that fantastic maturing stock that they have. Let me see. Stephen says he thought Bushmills burnt to a crisp in 1895, so even the 1784 isn't that true. Yeah, so it's a very checkered past and history to Bushmills, and we have to have somebody on from Bushmills one of these days to talk about it. A very storied history that doesn't get told enough, but there have been many fires and bombings and all kinds of things that have happened that have interrupted the history of Bushmills through the years. But it is, the marketing folks have a great time with 1608, don't they? That date. oldest licensed distillery in the world, 1608. I love the Kilbeggan story of the fact that they are the oldest continuously licensed distillery, in the sense that the townspeople of Kilbeggan paid the government to renew the license every year, so that the town would always have a distillery and would always have its license, which I love that particular story. Gochin says that he has Powers Gold label in his glass, but has enjoyed Bushmills 10, and we'll get the 16. Lorcan wants to know why 21-year-old is my favorite. It's hard to know. When I first had it, Lorcan, it wasn't too long ago, and again, I'm only getting really into whiskies in the past 2 years, and it wasn't too long ago, maybe only 2 years ago, I had the 21-year-old, and I had it in a bar in Portland, Oregon, called the Scotch Lodge. And it was sitting on the shelf there. I thought, you know what, I should try that. I haven't had that before. And I ordered it. And the fruit notes that came out in that single malt were absolutely extraordinary. And I'd put it up there beside Redbreast 21 in terms of its quality and its flavor, some just mouth-watering. Like, even if I think about it now, my mouth waters. I'm still trying to understand all the flavors and all the profiles to be able to describe them accurately, but it's a fruit bomb in your mouth. Absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous whiskey. Let me see. David said that Bushmills 10 was his first non-basic whiskey about 10 years ago. Fantastic. And Julie is doing a bottle kill of the 1608 anniversary edition. Fantastic. Julie there in Colorado, not too far from the Talnua Distillery, the American distillery making pot still whiskey, as a tribute to Irish pot still, or inspired by Irish pot still. So that's a great one to have in your glass, 1608. John says that Munster got its license to distill in 10th of January 1608, which was before Bushmills. Oh, now we're down to days. Look, 400 years ago, and we're down to a few days. This is the debate I'm here for. This is the one. Wayne loves Bushmills 21. Let me see what else. Irish distillers sold Bushmills in 2005, said Peter. And JJ is going to bed in Canada. Good man. Yeah, so, oh yes, this is Liam says the Acacia casks distillery exclusive was delicious. Absolutely. I love an Acacia cask finish or aging. Absolutely beautiful expression of Bushmills. So that's what's in my glass at the moment. Let me know what's in your glass as we start to consider making the virtual trip down to Dingle in the southwest coast of Ireland. Let me queue up the next part of this live stream so that we can head down the road. But let me know what's in your glass. There's my little banner. All right, so where are you in the world right now? What are you drinking? Let me know. I'd love to have a chat about it. I'd love to learn more about what you're drinking. Dave Cummins asks me, what do I think the next global Bushmills release will be? Well, I don't know. It's a great question. Maybe somebody here from who's representing Bushmills might weigh in for us. I think they seem to be very busy producing some younger whiskey that is doing a marvelous trade in mixed martial arts circles right now, which is probably making a lot of money for them. Stephen McGinnis says Bushmills 21 was the first whiskey he ever tried. His uncle gave him a glass when he was 18, still one of his favorites. It was all downhill from there, Stephen. If you start with Bushmills 21, where do you go from there? Steve Smathers says that Bushmills 16 holds a special place in his heart. Great night in O'Neill's pub. Great stuff. David's in Los Angeles drinking Blackbush. Blackbush is lovely. So Bushmills original we have here aged in ex-bourbon barrels, and then of course Blackbush has got that sherry component, ex-Oloroso sherry barrels, and a higher malt component compared to the grain. Blackbush is a lovely, affordable whiskey. Really enjoy Blackbush, but hard to beat Bushmills original for the money. Marshall's got his Dingle number 3 waiting in South Carolina as we move down to Dingle in the southwest corner of Ireland for the next part of our tasting. Well, we're going to go there now because there's a lot to talk about with Dingle, or we'll be here for the whole night. And as we go down there, let me know again what you're drinking. Let me pull up the next stop for us. All right. So we're heading down to Dingle. Let me get my glass. We are going down to Dingle in the southwest corner. The reason I'm focusing on Dingle tonight is for a few reasons. And let me talk about what those reasons are. So we're going to Dingle tonight as a virtual trip because of 2 reasons. One, I had a fantastic podcast episode, a conversation with Mary Ferreter, the global ambassador and general manager of the Dingle Distillery, and an absolute lady, a kind soul who has done wonders for the, together with likes of Dave Cummins, who's here tonight, in sharing the brand of Dingle, and not just the brand of the Dingle Distillery or Dingle Whiskey or Dingle Gin or Vodka, but Dingle, the town, and the Dingle Peninsula and the Dingle region. And there are many of you here tonight who have had plans to go to Ireland, who had plans cancelled, who have had plans shelved, who have lost money on flights that you can't rebook, and who have accommodations that you can't get your money back from. And I know there's many stories of people who want to get to Ireland. I know that we can't get there right now, but what we can do is we can get there virtually. And so my goal tonight is to do a little virtual trip down to Dingle because of the great conversation we had in the podcast with Mary and with Graham, the new master distiller from Scotland, and his lovely wife, Faye, who joined me in the podcast episode, who sheltered from the rain, who came in out of the rain and joined Mary Ferreter and I for a chat. And so the four of us had a lovely chat this week. And if you haven't checked out that episode of Stories and Sips, I really encourage you to do so. It's all about Dingle Distillery's founding mother, which is Mary Ferreter, who has been part of the Dingle story since before Dingle Whiskey was a story. And she had shared remarkable, heartfelt insight into the growth or the establishment of the distillery, the risks taken by the late Oliver Hughes and his cousins and the people of Dingle and those who worked in the distillery in bringing the first whiskey and the first gin to the market. And in doing so, heroed and celebrated the town. And she shared insights from somebody who was so close only could, and so close to a business that lost its founder long before they should have lost their founder. And in doing so, the distillery didn't just lose somebody. The town of Dingle, and of course his own family and the greater drinks industry, lost a great figure in Oliver Hughes. And Mary shared some wonderful stories that just warmed my heart this week. So I want to celebrate Dingle tonight. I want to hero Dingle Whiskey, and I want to celebrate Mary and the great people of Dingle, who are some of the nicest people on earth. And I've managed to spend some fantastic weeks, days, afternoons in Dingle. And it is a place where whenever I am homesick for Ireland, despite my maps that talk about Cork and not Cork, I long to be in Dingle. And I'd love to be down in the Dingle Peninsula. So we're going to go there tonight. We're going to take a virtual tour. We're going to take a virtual tour down to the southwest peninsula, the Dingle Peninsula, Slayhead, Dingle, the village of Dingle, and more other great towns that are out there on the Dingle Peninsula, like Bentry, and so many others that we'll talk about. So I'm going to pour for myself Dingle Single Malt, fourth small batch release. So this was released last year. So this year they released batch number 5. This is batch number 4. And this continues their experimentation with the different casks that have been used to age, to mature their single malt whiskey. Give myself a nice healthy pour in my Powers glass there. I love this glass so much. This is the 4th release of their small batch single malt. 3 different casks were used in this. 3 different vattings there. We've got bourbon, sherry, and port casks. So it says on the label, a marriage. So whenever you combine single malts together, you're not blending, because blending is reserved for 2 or 3 different expressions, like single malt, single pot still, grain. But in this case, it's a marriage, which I think is a much nicer term and more specific to this. It's a marriage of bourbon, sherry, and port casks. And this was released last year. Every year has a new batch release, and this year celebrated batch number 5, and batch number 3 was the first batch to make it to the United States. It was the first batch to make it over, and as Mary referred to it in the episode, it was the first batch to begin the American story of Dingle, which they're very proud of. And I have a little bit of batch 3 in the cupboard over there, and I know Marshall, you're drinking batch number 3 down there in South Carolina, and I'm on to batch number 4, which to me, I haven't had a chance to taste the batch number 5 yet. Batch number 4 to me has been the most evolved, the most complex, and maybe the most refined of the batches so far. And that's not surprising, is it? Because every year, more time in the casks, more time in the barrels is giving more of a wood influence. It is competing with the distillate influence, and I am a fan of wood-forward, wood-influenced whiskies, and I know others are can be fans of younger distillate-forward whiskies, but for me, this is a lovely one. So let me have a little nose of this. Yeah, it's a lovely balance there. It's obviously it's still a young whiskey. It's, what is it now? Probably 5 years, 5 to 6 years maybe in age. Somebody will correct me on that. Still a small batch, but I'm loving the marriage of the casks together. The sherry note, middle of the palate, port on the length, port on the finish. Nice sweetness on the finish there. Looking forward to trying the batch 5, but let me see. Yeah, it's every batch is just evolving. Even the colors are changing with the different color contributions coming from that wood. That port cask giving a little bit of a ruby contribution there, no doubt, to the color of that. So Dingle, really interesting story, the Dingle Distillery, and let me know if you've tried this and if you like it. Sean asks if I cannot bring myself to say Kerry. I will. I'll say Kerry, and I will call it the Kingdom. It is the Kingdom. There's no doubt about it. It does compete with Cork for its beauty, and I'll be put on record for saying that. I don't have any inhibitions about saying that at all, Sean. So no worries. It is the Kingdom, and I know myself that up there in Killowen, it's also referred to the Kingdom. So we're going from one kingdom to the next tonight. So let me know if anyone has tried the Dingle Batch 4. But when the Dingle Distillery opened in 2012, they were the first new purpose-built distillery in more than 100 years in Ireland. At the time of their establishment in 2012, the only other distilleries in Ireland were the Midleton Distillery, the Bushmills Distillery, the Cooley Distillery, and the Kilbeggan Distillery. And so they were the fifth. They were the fifth distillery in Ireland at the time. So that's going back to 2012, which is only 8 short years ago. So in the 8 years since 2012, we've gone from 5 distilleries to 31 operating distilleries in Ireland, which is remarkable. And I'm going to make a bet that we wouldn't have 31 operating distilleries if it wasn't for 2 of those distilleries. The first is Midleton and their expensive push of Irish whiskey around the world in establishing Jameson as a market leader. And the second is in Dingle itself. The fact that Dingle, the founders of Dingle made a push and took a risk back in 2010 and 11 and planning this and put their money where their mouth is. Without that risk and the excitement around the launch of their whiskies and the reception that these whiskies have got, I don't think we would have had such a diverse set of distilleries now across the island of Ireland, inspired. I think they're inspired by the likes of what Dingle has done. So I think they were ahead of the curve in the craft distillery movement in Ireland, and I think they're too proud to probably say that. Steve says he wants a bottle of batch 4. It's $100 though. Yeah, so it started to make its way to the United States, and it's not entry-level product. There's no doubt about it. It is going for about $100 everywhere that I've seen it, from $90 to $100. Some people, let me see, Marshall says it's absolutely worth it. Julie says she's pouring some to taste with me. David asks if you can justify that price for a 4 to 5 year whiskey. It's a great question, David. It depends what you use to justify whiskey and pricing. For some, they are equating the age with the price. If it's this old, it must be this price, because I saw another one that was that old and that's that price. But of course, the economics aren't the same. The economics of a Dingle distillery are not the same as the economics of a Midleton distillery. The efficiencies of scale of Midleton can be passed on to us that the inefficiencies of a Killowen or a Dingle can't, or the inefficiencies are passed along to us. There are no efficiencies in a smaller distillery. And so whether you can justify the price or not is a personal decision. But I would say that I understand why it costs this. I'm not saying that I agree that a 4 or 5 year old whiskey should cost this, but I know why it does. And I think that's important, an important distinction. Liam says that they are trailblazers for new Irish whiskey distilleries. I agree with that. Dingle is truly unique. It's worth it if only buying it once. So let's do a little tour of Dingle as we look at these comments. I know the wind and the rain is howling in Ireland right now for those who are hanging into the chat. For those who are with me around the United States, I think the weather conditions are different. Ohio has been underwater, flooding, just like Michigan has over the past few days. The sun is shining in Ohio now. I look out the window. It's a dull, overcast day in Southern California, which is fine. It suits my pale Irish complexion. We don't like too much sun. So this is just nice. The temperature is just nice. So wherever you are, I hope you're staying safe. We're now going to go on a little tour of Dingle. And let me hide this comment here to make space for what we're going to do next. So Dingle, of course, is a small little town in the southwest of Ireland. Pull up the map there again on the Dingle Peninsula. And I first came across Dingle when I was a teenager, and I remember going down there with my family and absolutely loving this little fishing village, long before there was a distillery there, long before there were many tourist attractions at all. But of course, there was one tourist attraction in Dingle, and that tourist attraction has been there long before I was even going to Dingle, and that is fungi, the Dingle dolphin. Bottlenose dolphin, male bottlenose dolphin, that has been a mainstay of the Dingle tourism industry for 36 years. Fungi actually just entered the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest mammal living in the wild that lives on its own. So it doesn't live in a pack, it doesn't live with other creatures similar to itself. It lives on its own and it relies on people for company. And fungi has been coming in and out of Dingle Bay now for 36 years and hasn't left. It just lives between the mouth of the harbour and inside the bay, and has been a mainstay of the tourism industry for many, many years. And I always tell people the story of how I first was encouraged to take a trip out to see fungi, because you can get on these little tour boats that go out and see fungi. And only these smart, clever people in Kerry could come up with an approach like this to convince you to go out. Because not everybody wants to get onto a fishing boat and go out outside the harbour in what can be rough conditions on the off chance that they'll see a dolphin and spend money to do it. But the smart fishermen in Dingle would tell you that you don't have to pay for your ticket until you see fungi. And that way they wouldn't take your money getting on the boat. Instead, they'd only take it on the way home if in fact fungi had made an appearance. But these were not... These fishermen were not running a charity, and they weren't running a non-profit. They were smart fishermen, and still are. They were cute Kerry fishermen who knew well that every time a boat went out that had a bit of smell of fish to it, the dolphin was going to turn up. And sure enough, fungi always made an appearance. So fungi has been there for 36 years now. Long before there was a distillery, fungi was attracting tourists in. I would argue that the distillery now is taking some of that tourism activity, bringing it over across the town to them. But I think we should remember that there was a dolphin that did it all first. There's even a statue down in the harbour to fungi, a beautiful statue honouring him. Now, there's been many locals or many tourists have suggested that there's no way a dolphin could live that long and still be entertaining visitors to Dingle. And as many people think it's either a robot or some kind of a fisherman strapping a fin to his back and swimming around the harbour. But I imagine that is certainly not the case. But I do worry about the day when poor old fungi dies and passes away, because it'll be a sad day for the people of the Kingdom of Kerry and Dingle in particular. Wayne asks, if you were fed as well as fungi, would you leave? Probably not. Probably not. Julie saw fungi in 1998. Here come the conspiracy theories. I knew it. The conspiracy theories will be coming in hard and fast now. But fungi is a great part of the Dingle experience for sure. But fungi is not the only thing, of course, in Dingle. We talked a little bit about the distillery, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we can't talk about Dingle, can we, without talking about the wonderful pub that is Dick Mack's Pub, one of many old Victorian era pubs in Dingle that are virtually unchanged. They've not changed for many years, for 100+ years, nor will they or should they ever change, because they are perfect. And Dick Mack's is one such pub. And where is Dick Max? Does anybody know in Dingle? I think everybody will share the same answer. It's opposite the church. And when anybody asks, where's the church? It's opposite Dick Max. And there on Green Street in Dingle. And it is a absolute mecca for Irish whiskey fans. If you have not been to Dick Max pub, then you're missing out. Here is me in Dick Max with Finn, who runs it. Finn Mack, who runs Dick Max and was the man behind the decision to create a brewery in the backyard, which they've done. So it's now Dick Max Bar and Brewery. Finn can regularly be found down the back there working in the brewery, and if he's not in the brewery, he's probably further down the garden lifting weights in his outdoor gym that he's created there in the at the back of Dick Max as well. And another great fan of Irish whiskey by the name of Peter White, who is a friend of Finn's, recommended a few years ago that he get into Irish whiskey. And sure enough, he did. He got into Irish whiskey, and he got into it in a big way, to the point where the shelves now are from ceiling to floor complete with every Irish whiskey you've ever heard of that's ever been for sale. From €4 a glass to €400, you can find every whiskey in there that you want, from dream casks down to the youngest of whiskies ever to be released in Ireland. They're all there on the shelf. You can lose days, weeks, months of your life in Dick Max, and you'll thank them for it, because there's no greater place to be. And when the wind is howling outside and the rain is pouring down in Ireland like it is tonight, wouldn't you want to be locked away in Dick Max, maybe tucked into the snug there? You can see the archway of the snug behind our heads, tucked in there, a few bags of peanuts nearby, all the whiskies you'd want, and a few pints of porter to wash it all down. There's nowhere better to be. And I know many of you have been to Dingle and have experienced Dick Max. So Dave Cummins, who is a great Dingle ambassador, weighing in on batch 4. It's a gem of a whiskey, really starting to take shape, getting better year after year. It absolutely is, Dave. I'd agree with you. And I'm looking forward to trying batch 5. I tried a number of the founding father casks like Ash's Restaurant, Dingle whiskey, which is superb. I actually tried that in Dick Max. Thought it was a remarkable, I think that was as far as I remember, that was the Pedro Jimenez finish. And that was a remarkable whiskey, which I really enjoyed. So great to see you weighing in there, Dave. Thanks so much. Steve asks, what did I have that night? So my wife and I spent a week in Dingle last year, 7 nights in Dingle. All 7 nights were spent in Dick Max. That wasn't the intention. It wasn't my wife's intention to see me in there 7 nights of the week. But once you go in there the first night, you realize, sure, if I'm to work my way through these shelves, I'd have to spend a lot longer than 1 or 2 nights here. And so 7 nights is what we did. I drank some amazing whiskies in Dick Max. The first time I ever got to try Dungorney 1964, I ordered it in Dick Max. First time I got to try the Dunville's single malt Port Morant rum cask finish. I got to try it in Dick Max. And have a great picture of me in behind the bar. That night when I was sitting there, I started ordering some whiskies. At one point, Finn just turned to me and said, isn't it about time you got your own whiskies? And so anytime I wanted a whiskey, I went in and I poured it myself, and they added it to the bill. It wasn't that I was getting it for nothing. I still paid for it, but I did the work of actually pouring it, which I wasn't sad about. David says he wants to go spend a month in Dingle now. I think we all do. A lock-in should be organised, Barry. Stephen says, I might even behave myself. Well, 2 things, Stephen. First of all, a lock-in will have to be organised. And I had a lock-in in Dick Max that week. I was there till the wee small hours. Finn didn't know about it that night, but he told me the next day. He said, I check Instagram the following day to see the posts that come out on Instagram from the bartenders who work, the barmen and girls who work in the bar. And he says, I'm always looking behind their faces to see the clock on the wall, to see what time they took the picture. And he knows well if there's been a lock-in in the pub or not. But yeah, we will organise a lock-in. But the second thing is, you won't behave yourself. We already know you won't behave yourself, and we don't want you to behave yourself. So we'll have a lock-in and you won't behave yourself. Lorcan says he really misses the pub looking at this. Absolutely. Absolutely. Maureen says she's rewriting her itinerary. Dingle is a must-do. Maureen, it's absolutely a must-do. You can't go to Ireland and not go to Dingle. You absolutely have to do it. 7 drunken nights, asks Andrew. 7 well-behaved yet well-sozzled nights, let's say. I'd hate to venture as far as saying it was a drunken night, but it was certainly a well-sozzled night. Johnny says, if you stay in Dingle one night, you want 2. And if you stay 2, you want a week. You can't wait to get back. So Dick Mack's, of course, isn't the only pub in Dingle. There are many other fantastic pubs in Dingle that you absolutely have to go and visit. One such pub is Foxy John's Bar and Hardware. And what you're seeing there on the screen, you'll notice there's no alcohol to be seen there. And that's because when you walk in the door of Foxy John's Bar and Hardware, what you're actually getting on your right-hand side as you walk in is a hardware store. A hardware store where you can pick up a box of nails, you can pick up an old tire, an electrical cable, you can pick up a few seeds for the garden, you can pick up a little bit of fertilizer, a bag of 10, 10, 20, whatever you want for the house, for the garden, for the yard, for the shed, you can find it there in the hardware side. And so if you're going out in the afternoon, you get to tell your significant other that you're going out to the hardware store to buy a box of nails. And sure enough, you won't be wrong. You're still going out for the old box of nails. But then you're actually turning to your left after you've got your box of nails and you're ordering a pint. And you're sitting on another stool on the opposite side of the room. And you'll have a nice old pint of Guinness there, drop of Dingle whiskey, sitting in Foxy John's Bar and Hardware. And then further out the back, I don't know if they still do it today, but they used to make coffins. And they were making coffins out the back. So if you went for your box of nails and then you ordered your pint of Guinness and then you happened to keel over after the effort of it all, they'd have put you into a box out the back and sent you home in a lovely coffin made to your specifications. So all kinds of great things could happen in a bar like Foxy John's. I was there last year, had a few lovely drinks there. I had a drop of Power's 12-year-old sitting there on that right-hand stool that you see on the far right-hand side, sitting there, happy out. And I went there a couple of nights and I realized that the hardware bit isn't just for show. Things actually sell there because I noticed things missing off the shelves. So people are actually going in, buying the drop of the bit of hardware and then having their pints and their drop of whiskey at the same time. Let me see what our other comments have we got here. Another great stop, says Johnny. It's absolutely a great stop. Stephen says, with 7 nights, there's only so many times you can visit the distillery. You're on the sesh for 7 days. Yeah, there's a good old session to be had there for 7 days, all right. And Lorcan says, hardware is essential services. That's right. So right now, hardware stores fall under the category of essential services in Ireland, but bars don't. So I think there's going to be a line out the door for hardware for Foxy John's so people can buy, in quotation marks, a box of nails. But of course, I'd say those Guinness pipes will be getting very cold very quickly as people order the drop of porter to go with the box of nails as well. Steve asks if there's good seafood in Dingle. Is the Pope Catholic, is what I would ask. There's great seafood in Dingle. It'll come straight off the boat and onto your plate. There's some of the finest seafood you'll find it in Dingle. Remarkable food altogether. Some great stops there. Local mussels are a must. Great food all round. Dave says savage seafood altogether. And now Marshall's moving on to Dingle, batch number 4. Great stuff. He hasn't visited in a year, but it's just as good as he remembers. Fantastic. Good stuff. Right, so I know a few of you have got Dingle in your glass. We're going to continue our tour of Dingle, and on we go. And of course, we mentioned the distillery. Let's bring it up and have a little, a quick talk about it before we move on. The Dingle Distillery, of course, is the reason why we are drinking Dingle whiskey. But they not only produce whiskey in there, they also produce a remarkable gin and vodka in the distillery. I've got some gin and vodka actually in here as well. Let me grab it while I'm talking to you, so that you can see what it looks like. All right, so here's the Dingle vodka, unique bottle there, that purple bottle, and then the Dingle gin I would credit with starting and certainly fast-tracking the gin craze in Ireland. I came back to Ireland in 2014 from being in the States for a while, and I went into a local bar in Cork, and everyone was drinking out of these big oversized wine glasses, and inside was a clear liquid with what looked like a shaving of cucumber. And I thought, have we lost the run of ourselves? No, we had just discovered a Dingle gin, and everybody was drinking Dingle gin with elderflower tonic and being all very continental altogether. But Dingle gin, I think, would be credited with certainly starting and maintaining the gin craze in Ireland, and that big oversized glass had a big part to play with it. And the gin and the vodka, of course, that are sold throughout Ireland and proudly in Dingle and throughout the Porterhouse pub group, where they are the pouring gin and vodka, have done what is needed to keep the lights on in the distillery while the whiskey matures, because it's an expensive business letting whiskey mature there. Stephen says there's a place called Out of the Blue on the seafront, which has the best seafood in Dingle. And Marshall likes the gin. Haven't had the vodka. I'm not a vodka drinker. Neither is Mrs. Stories and Sips. So if we have guests over, when guests can finally come to our house again, that'll get cracked open. But the gin is open. We've had a few pours out of that, and there'll be more pours to be had as well. Peter says he can't wait for the Stories and Sips trip to Ireland, saving your money. Peter, you and me both. I was talking about this with Mrs. Stories and Sips this week. So she's a fantastic travel planner. She has been responsible for some great trips that we've managed to go on, because she knows what to look for and she knows how to get access to great places. And so she's already putting pen to paper on what a Stories and Sips trip to Ireland will look like. And Dingle, you better believe, is going to play a big role in that, and getting some fun, perhaps, experiences at the distillery would certainly form part of that, if they'd be so kind to let us in. Cassandra says that Dingle and Gunpowder gin are some of the best. Chris says, sign me up for the trip. Yeah, I will be doing a trip to Ireland. There's no doubt about it. We're talking about small, exclusive, high-touch trips. In other words, let's go and do things that others can't do. Let's go behind the scenes. Let's go behind the scenes and have experiences that aren't available to the general public. And we'll do that because we'll all be fans of whiskey, and hopefully the distilleries will work with us to create some experiences. And I know they will, because I'm already working on some with them. And we'll do some fun events and special events. So small groups, maybe it's 8 to 10 of us, go to Ireland at a time and have really a fantastic 4 or 5 days that'll just knock your socks off. Real trip of a lifetime. So that's absolutely coming. So let's continue our talk on Dingle, though. The distillery, of course, has been there since 2012, cranking out their 2 barrels a day. Maybe it's more now. They just released their Dingle Batch 5 single malt. They also have a Dingle pot still whiskey. There's a couple of pot still releases, more to come. And I asked Graham Cool, the new master distiller, about the fact that these are batches. So you'd imagine that there comes a time when you can no longer put a batch on a whiskey. I mean, in 20 years, will it say batch 24 or batch 27? It's unlikely. And so we can, I would say, anticipate a time when there would be a standard Dingle release, perhaps a Stangle, or perhaps a permanent expression of the Dingle brand. Maybe there's a permanent single malt, or maybe there's a permanent pot still, that there's enough stock available, there's enough matured stock that allows that to be the case. But it's a small operation, cranking out not a lot of whiskey, a lot compared to Killowen, I think you'd agree with me, but still not a ton of whiskey. But I'm excited to see what happens there on that side. Stories and Sips Ireland trip. Steve's already writing the itinerary on my behalf. Dingle, Waterford, Middleton, Dick Max, Pierce. Yes to lots of those. They will be on the itinerary, no doubt about it. Stephen asks if locals can join in. Absolutely, because when we come over, what I want a welcoming party. I want Stephen McGuinness and Mark McLaughlin and all you lads and ladies coming out to the pubs where we go. And if you're not staying with us on the trip, at least you can meet us for drinks and pints of porter and glasses of whiskey and have a good old time. It's going to happen. We're going to try and do it. If we can't do it this year, it'll be early next year, but we're going to do it. And if we can do it yet this year, we're certainly going to find a way to do it. Stephen says there might not be a Mrs. Stories and Sips coming along for a trip like that. Stephen, she could drink you under the table, and Mrs. Stories and Sips will be front and center on all these trips, because without her, the trips aren't as fun. She's a great girl for the whiskey, and a Connemara fan and a gin fan. So she's going to be front and center for all of those trips as well. All right, so that was the distillery that we touched on a little bit, but it's not all there is to Dingle, as we mentioned. There is more to Dingle. So let me pull up what else I want to share with you. So we talked about Dick Max, we talked about Foxy John's. We must, of course, talk about Sleigh Head, and Sleigh Head is the drive that you'll take out there heading west from Dingle. So you'll see on the screen Dingle on the right hand side of that map. You take that road out of Dingle past the distillery. You put the distillery on your right hand side, you go over that bridge, turn left at the roundabout, put the distillery on your right, and you just drive. And you are going to see some of the most beautiful scenery you have ever seen in your life. It is paradise on a summer's day when the sun is shining. There is no greater place to be. And I would almost defect from Cork to the Kingdom of Kerry, such is the beauty down there, and I don't mind saying it. So Sleigh Head is an absolute must-see. It's a tremendous drive, and as you'll notice there on the far left of the map, you'll see the Great Blasket Island. So you'll go out to Ventry and out a little bit further. You'll be able to take the boat out to the Blasket Islands, as we did last year. So let me show you another picture here. This is what you're seeing on Sleigh Head as you drive out there. And that is just a tiny piece of what could take you a couple of hours of a drive. It's absolutely spectacular. And so if we can't be there right now, my goal is to bring you to these places virtually. We'll put these in our itinerary for when we do the Stories and Sips trips. But in the meantime, every week I'm going to add in one of these destinations that is centered around whiskey. It might be Middleton, it might be East Cork, it might be Dublin, it might be Galway, it might be County Clare. But I'm going to touch on these each live stream because I think it's important that we see what's waiting for us. And if we can't be there right now, we're going to be there soon, that's for sure. So I mentioned the Blasket Islands. So let me pull that map up. So to the southwest here of the Dingle Peninsula is the Great Blasket Island. And the Great Blasket Island is an extraordinary place. It's something that has to be seen once in your life. It is an today uninhabited island. At its peak in the early 1900s, there were as many as 150 people living on this island. They couldn't live anywhere else. They couldn't afford to live on the mainland. The only place that they were able to live, only because they didn't pay, they weren't taxed or forced to pay any rent when they first did, was out here on the Blasket Island, the Great Blasket Island, an unforgiving island in terms of weather, in terms of treacherous sea conditions. Some of the most dangerous sea conditions in Ireland will be found between the Great Blasket Island and the mainland, the Dingle Peninsula. But 150 people at its peak made their life here. They made their life fishing. They made their life rearing some cattle, growing crops on the island, and had a remarkable life that has been chronicled and documented in a number of books, some of which have been written by the islanders, famous islanders, people like Peg Sayers, a man called Tomás O'Crahon, who have been recognized globally as literary treasures. And this one island gave birth to 3 or 4 of these literary geniuses because they did nothing more than chronicle their life, chronicle their way of living, chronicle the stories they told one another and how they lived at a very different time. And when I picked up Tomás O'Crahon's book, The Islander, I couldn't put it down. And I couldn't put it down until I finished it. And it's a remarkable place. And I want to show you the view that Mrs. Stories and Sips and I had when we spent a night there. So you can actually stay on the island. There's no electricity. There's no hot water. You're a few miles from the mainland. The only way to get there is by an inflatable boat. And a lot of the time of the year, it's inaccessible. There's no pier there. There's just a little jetty, a little slipway to bring your boat up there. And we stayed there overnight. The quietest place I've ever been in my life. The most peaceful place that I think we've ever been, where there's no animal to hunt you, there's no people to bother you, there's no electricity, there's no hot water, there's just peace. So here is the video, or here is the view that we got from the room of the house that we stayed in. Let me play that one more time because it's that good, isn't it? It's the half door that we opened in the living room of the house that we stayed in. There's only 3 of these refurbished homes on the island that you can stay in, and we stayed in one of them. And you're in the living room, you open this half door. You can hear a donkey neighing in the distance. All that's on the island are a couple of donkeys, tons of rabbits, hares, birds, and for wildlife, that's about it. And it is a spectacular place, and I can't wait to go back there. So that's the Great Blasket Island, and I think some of you have been there, but the view is absolutely incredible. Maureen asks, why would you leave? It's virtually uninhabitable so much of the year because of the storms, the wind, the rain, the cold. And in the 1950s, they were down to not very many islanders left there. I think they were down to 30 or 40 people left on the island in the 1950s. And there was no doctor, there's no school, there's no priest. And if anybody died on the island, they were taken to the mainland in these nave-ogues, these Irish boats made out of cowhide and wood. And they were taken to the mainland in a formation of boats in the shape of a cross that would have made its way across this treacherous stretch of land to the Dingle Peninsula, where they would have been buried. But there came a time in the 1950s when, because there was no doctor there and there were sicknesses breaking out on the island and people were just going to die because no doctor could get there, it was deemed too unsafe for the island to be inhabited, and the islanders were moved off the island for the last time. And an incredibly sad time for many of them who'd only known that kind of life and who'd lived there in hardship but in peace for many, many years. But today, luckily, we can go visit and we can stay overnight there, and if we're lucky, we'll get there. But you could book a room there, and you may turn up at the pier only to be told it's too treacherous to get there, and it might look perfectly crystal clear out there, but you can't get out there because of the conditions. And once you get out a few hundred feet out, you'll discover why. So Andrew says he was told you could tell the weather in Dingle by whether or not you could see the blaskets. If you couldn't see the island, it was raining. And if you could see the island, it was going to rain. Yeah, and Richard has a good point. Star Wars was filmed not too far away from there. So Skellig Michael is the pyramidal-shaped island about 2 miles southwest of the Great Blasket Island. And yes, there's a number of scenes, and 2 Star Wars movies are filmed there, including the last scene. I can't remember the name of the Star Wars movie. Somebody will put it in there, but it's where Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, kind of the camera pans back and he's there on Skellig Michael. So it's become a Star Wars mecca, that part of the world. Not the Blasket Islands, but Skellig Michael, a big rock that sticks out of the ocean. Ashley says it's a long way to go for a pint. It certainly is. It certainly is. John says it's gorgeous, and Marshall says it's fantastic. It is. It's absolutely beautiful place on the Blaskets, and as soon as possible, I want to go back there and spend some time there. If you brought your own tent, you could stay there for nothing. There's no charge to camp. It's government owned, like it's state owned. The government of Ireland owns the island. A portion of it is leased out or managed or maybe owned in some way by a local who challenged the Irish government's ownership of it at one point and managed to retain management of the homes that are there and maintains them and coordinates the tourism factor. But you could bring your own tent and just plop it there on the grass, and you could sleep quite peacefully with nobody to bother you. And I'm looking forward to going back there. Now, what else do I have for Dingle? I think that is my tour of Dingle. So this has been a little virtual trip down to the southwest of Ireland, because I'm convinced that these places are waiting for us. And I'm convinced that the people who've been trying to go there, you who've been trying to go there, still want to go there. And what I want to do is I want to show you what's there so that when you go there, you'll know what to see, you'll know what to do. So we'll center some of these virtual trips each week around whiskey areas, whiskey regions, like County Kerry, County Clare, County Cork, Waterford increasingly, Northern Ireland, County Down, becoming, as Brendan mentioned, a mecca for Irish whiskey distilling. So we'll have stories every week, we'll have sips, and then we'll have virtual trips until the point where we can have stories, sips, and trips in person. And that's ultimately the goal. So we have now gone on our live stream for 2 hours and 10 minutes. It's a record. It's been one of the longest live streams that we've done. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed my little trip around Ireland. I hope you enjoyed having Brendan on, a great knowledge and a great agitator in the Irish whiskey world for good reason. And I think what he's doing up there in Killowen is really exciting to see, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else he's doing. I really thank you for turning up here and accompanying me on these Friday nights. And I know so many of you messaged me to share that this has become the highlight of your week, and that gives me no end of pleasure and satisfaction knowing that we're doing something here that's bringing people together. If it's no more than just somebody to chat to, isn't that all that we want in life? It's somebody who'll listen to us and somebody who'll maybe share a story with us. And my hope is that these live streams do that for those who commit the time to turn up. Whether you stay for 5 minutes or you stay for 2 hours and 5 minutes, I'm delighted that you're here. I absolutely am. So for those of you who are fans of Irish whiskey, and you must be if you're still here after 2 hours, I really encourage you to check out my podcast every week on a Wednesday. It's called Stories and Sips, and it is released every Wednesday across all good podcast channels. It's also available on storiesandsips.com. Any of your podcast players on Apple Podcasts or Spotify will, of course, carry Stories and Sips. I'm releasing a new episode every Wednesday, and each episode is a deep dive into the people, the places, and the passion behind Irish whiskey. Conversations that go deeper than I could possibly do on a Friday night lock-in. Conversations that allow me to ask tough questions, sometimes emotional questions, maybe questions that aren't always asked of those behind Irish whiskey and those doing interesting things, human questions, because I want to elicit human answers and I want to get beyond the bottle. Because no matter what is listed here on the label, I can tell you that for every word on this label and every other label of Irish whiskey, there are hundreds of stories to go with them. And the great thing is about Irish whiskey, we don't have to make those stories up. The truth is far more interesting. So my podcast is all about uncovering those great stories, and we've had remarkable stories shared. It'll be no different this Wednesday. I'll give you a hint. It'll be somebody from the Waterford area of Ireland coming on to talk with us. Lots of interesting things happening in Waterford. 2 distilleries in particular are doing really interesting things. One of the founders from one of those distilleries will be talking to me on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to sharing that with you all. If you have any thoughts or ideas or suggestions on what I cover on these live streams in terms of whiskies that I share, or distillers and blenders and bonders that you'd like me to bring on, let me know, message me, or post a message in the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group. I'm in the middle of conversations with a number of distilleries right now about creating some experiences for us all in these times, or we might do nights dedicated to the stories of a particular distillery and sample all their whiskies and have people from the distillery come on and talk to us. And so building experiences that I think we can all get behind, and that'll bring us closer to the people behind the whiskey. So there's a few of those in the works that I'm hoping to bring to you over the next few weeks and months. So stay tuned to those. I'm really looking forward to that. So Peter asks if he can start sending me money now. Yes, Peter, you can. If you can get yourself some envelopes that are in the shape of $100 bills, and then send as many of those as you want over the coming days, weeks, and months, I'll keep them in safekeeping for you, and I'll keep an inventory of them. So yeah, you can send me all the money you want. Now we'll do the trips. We'll definitely do them. It's coming. It's absolutely coming. Chris asks what's on the menu for next week. I don't know what we're tasting next week yet. It depends on. I've got some thoughts. I normally release the what I'm tasting in the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group on a Wednesday or a Thursday. I'll try and do that a little bit earlier if I can, to give you a chance to get hold of them so that you can sip along with me. There may be something from Waterford. You don't know whether that's Waterford Distillery or Blackwater Distillery. I'm not going to tell you, but there'll be 3 great whiskies coming up. And again, it depends on how well I can work with some distilleries and brands to bring experiences who can bring us interesting whiskies as well. So lots of that on the way. So thanks very much to everybody for joining. I hope you've enjoyed my virtual trip to Dingle, and I hope you enjoyed the chat with Brendan and a little pit stop in Bushmills on the way down. We had 3 great whiskies, we had great conversation. Thanks to everyone for joining. I hope you enjoy, for those of you in the United States, enjoy your Memorial Day weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, follow guidelines, wash your hands, and I look forward to seeing you in the Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group. Until later, sláinte and slán.